The Life Force Alchemist. Act 1, The Weight of Living. Chapter 1, The Quiet Science. The cafeteria at UA High School smelled of rice and miso, and Izuku Midoriya ate alone. This was not unusual. He had a notebook open beside his tray, the pages dense with handwriting so small it might have been printed by machine. Column after column of observations, sketched diagrams, and questions without answers lined the margins. His classmates sat 3 tables away, filling the air with laughter about the weekend and complaints about Aizawa's training regimen. Nobody looked over. Nobody needed to. Izuku was, for all practical purposes, invisible when he wanted to be. He preferred it that way. His pencil moved across a fresh page. At the top, in careful block letters, he had written, Organic Energy Transfer Practical Sealing? Beneath that heading, a branching diagram grew like a vine across the paper. At its root was a single observation he had made 4 months ago, during a joint combat exercise with Class 1B. Ryukyu had come to observe. The dragon hero was not yet top 10, but she carried herself as though she already understood what that weight would feel like. She had stood at the edge of the training field in civilian dress, arms folded, watching the first years with the kind of calm attention that made a person feel both important and completely transparent. Izuku had watched her watching them. That was, he acknowledged, a somewhat strange thing to do. But he had noticed something. When Ryukyu smiled at a particularly good exchange between Yaoyorozu and Tokoyami, the expression arrived slowly, like light returning to a room, and then faded just as slowly into something that was not quite tiredness. It was subtler than tiredness. It was the particular stillness of a person who had spent a very long time being excellent and who had not yet decided whether excellence was worth the cost. Izuku had drawn a little circle in his notebook and written the word residual beside it. That was the beginning. His quirk had been given a formal name by the testing office at UA after the entrance exam. The designation on his file was Vitality Manipulation, Class A3, Biological. The clinical summary described it as the ability to perceive and redirect bioelectric energy within living tissue, with secondary effects including accelerated cellular repair, temporary enhancement of physical condition, and limited reversal of age-related cellular degradation. The file also noted, in a dry paragraph near the bottom, that the long-term implications of the quirk were not fully understood and that the user should report any unusual secondary phenomena to the support staff immediately. Izuku had not reported anything unusual to the support staff. This was not because he was hiding anything dangerous. It was because the unusual things he had noticed were not dangerous. They were, if he was being honest with himself, beautiful in the way that very precise machinery is beautiful, in the way that an equation balances perfectly after a long page of working. His quirk did not merely redirect biological energy. It read it. Every living thing he focused on gave off something he could only describe as a signature, a texture of information that told him how old the cells were, how stressed, how depleted. Human beings, he had found, were almost universally running at a deficit. Heroes were running at a catastrophic deficit. He flipped back 4 pages in his notebook to a table he had been filling in over the course of the semester. The left column listed initials. He was careful never to write full names. The right columns tracked 4 variables: observed physical age, estimated biological age, estimated vitality reserve, and a 4th column he had labeled simply delta, meaning the gap between what a person should be and what they actually were. The deltas for his classmates were relatively modest. They were teenagers. They recovered quickly. Their deltas hovered between 7 and 15% below optimal, which was unremarkable for the physical demands of a hero course. The row he kept returning to was the one he had entered after the training day observation. The initials were RT. The estimated vitality reserve was 61%. The delta was 39. He had added a small asterisk and a note, "Does she know?" Of course she did not know. Nobody knew. The human body did not come with a fuel gauge. You felt fine until you did not, and by then the debt had usually compounded past easy recovery. Heroes trained harder than athletes, fought at full intensity, healed from injuries that would sideline ordinary people for months, and then reported to duty again with the cheerful efficiency that the public expected of them. The public did not ask what that efficiency cost. The public preferred not to think about it. Izuku thought about almost nothing else. He closed the notebook and stacked it under his tray. Across the room, Kaminari was demonstrating something with a spoon that made Ashido shriek with laughter. Kirishima stood on his chair to get a better view. The noise was warm and genuine, and Izuku felt, as he often did, a complicated fondness for it that he could not quite locate inside his chest. He gathered his things and left through the side door before anyone looked up. Chapter 2, 17%. The practical exercises on Tuesday mornings were Izuku's favorite part of the week, not because he enjoyed combat particularly, not because he liked being hit, though he had gotten considerably better at not being hit, but because the exercises put him in close proximity to pro heroes acting as instructors, and the instructors gave him data. Today the guest instructor was Midnight. Namiri Kiyama arrived in the faculty parking structure at 7:52 in the morning, which Izuku noted because he happened to be walking past the entrance when her motorcycle pulled in. He noted also that she dismounted with slightly less fluid ease than the videos on the Hero Billboard chart archive showed from 3 years ago. The difference was small. Most people would not have caught it. He caught it because he was already reading her without meaning to, the way a musician hears the tuning of an instrument without consciously deciding to listen. Her vitality reserve was 54%. He stopped walking. Then he made himself continue walking, because stopping in the middle of a corridor for no visible reason was the kind of behavior that attracted questions, and he did not yet have answers for the questions it would attract. 54%. He had put Midnight's baseline in his notebook during the sports festival of his first year, when she had been the match commentator and had stood close enough to him in the competitor staging area that he could read her with accuracy. Her reserve at that time had been 68%. In the 14 months since, she had declined by 14 points. That was not gradual decline. That was a slide. He sat through the morning briefing in Recovery Girls Annex, where Midnight laid out the day's scenario with her characteristic dry humor, making the first years laugh and making the exercise sound almost fun. She moved through the room with total authority. Nobody looking at her would have thought, this woman is running on just over half of what she should have. Nobody would have thought anything except that she was exactly what a pro hero looked like, polished and precise and perfectly in command. Izuku thought, what would it cost me to fix this? The question was not new. He had been thinking it in various forms for months. What stopped him from acting on it was a cluster of concerns he had organized into a mental list, the way he organized everything, and which he reviewed periodically the way a careful person reviews a budget. First, he had not told anyone the full range of his quirk's capabilities. The testing office assessment was accurate as far as it went, but it had not captured what he privately called the deep transfer function, the ability to donate vitality rather than simply redirect it. He could, in theory, push his own biological energy into another person and have it take root there, not as a temporary boost but as a permanent restoration. He had tested this on mice in the biology lab after hours, twice, with careful controls, and the results had been unambiguous. The mice he had treated had not aged normally. Their cellular markers, checked at 2-week intervals, showed consistent reversal. They were, in the most literal sense, younger after the transfer than before it. The mice had also become, somewhat troublingly, very attached to him. Second concern, the transfer cost him something. Not vitality, not in a way that left him depleted. It was more as though each transfer created a thread, a connection that ran between him and the recipient that he could feel even at a distance. The threads were not unpleasant. They were, if he was careful, useful, giving him ongoing access to the recipient's biological state so that he could monitor and adjust without repeated proximity. But they accumulated, and he did not know what they would feel like if he had dozens of them, or hundreds. Third concern, this was the one that actually stopped him. What he could offer was, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. Restored vitality. Reversed aging. Ongoing maintenance of peak physical condition. In exchange for what? He had no framework for this exchange. He was not willing to offer it for nothing, not because he was mercenary, but because he understood instinctively that gifts with no structure became obligations with no limit, and that a person who gave everything without terms became, eventually, nothing at all. He needed to think more carefully about terms. The exercise began and he moved through the training field with the kind of automatic competence that his body had developed over a year and a half of doing exactly this. He redirected 2 opponents and assisted Uraraka with a gravity anchoring problem without losing his train of thought. Midnight watched from the observation deck. He could feel the low signal of her vitality reserve even at 40 meters, a soft, steady awareness in the back of his mind, like a pilot light that had been burning a little too low for a long time. Afterward, in the changing room, Todoroki asked him what he was thinking about. Izuku said, "Nothing in particular." Todoroki, who was remarkably good at detecting this particular kind of lie, looked at him for a moment and then did not pursue it, which was one of the things Izuku had come to appreciate most about Todoroki. Chapter 3, The First Thread. He decided to tell her on a Wednesday, which happened by accident rather than planning. The accident was this: the sports medicine clinic attached to the hero course ran late afternoon open hours on Wednesdays for students recovering from training injuries, and Izuku, who had a bruised collarbone from a sparring session with Bakugo that recovery girl had declared unworthy of her time, went to the clinic at 3:45 to have it wrapped. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and athletic tape and was staffed by a rotating cast of support faculty. Midnight was there because she had jammed 2 fingers on the obstacle course railing during that morning's demonstration and had come in exactly late enough that the support student on duty had already left and there was no one to see to it. She was sitting on the examination table with her glove off and her hand resting on her knee, looking at the swollen knuckles with the particular expression of a person who has been ignoring an injury long enough that ignoring it has stopped working. She looked up when Izuku came in. "Midoriya," she said, with mild surprise. "You look terrible." "Thank you," he said. She almost smiled. "Bakugo?" "Always." She nodded as though this required no further commentary. He sat down on the bench opposite and began to unwind the temporary compression wrap he had put on himself that morning. For a moment they were both simply quiet in the way that people who are managing pain are quiet, focused inward, not unfriendly. He made his decision the way he made most decisions under pressure, quickly and without giving himself time to argue himself out of it. "Can I ask you something, Kayama-sensei?" "You can try. Do you feel tired?" He kept his voice very even, as though this were a clinical question, because he meant it as one. "Not today. Tired. Chronically tired. In a way that does not resolve with sleep." The almost smile disappeared. She looked at him the way she looked at students who had said something she was deciding whether to take seriously. "Why do you ask?" "Because I can see it," he said simply. "With my quirk. You are running at about 54% of your biological baseline. 3 years ago you were at 68. You have lost 14 points in a year and a half and I do not think anything in your schedule is going to give them back." The room was very quiet. He could hear the ventilation system. "That is an unusual thing to say to a teacher," she said finally. "Yes. It is also an unusual quirk. The file does not have everything." She was quiet again. He watched her process it, watched the professional wariness move through her expression and then, after a moment, give way to something that was simply a woman in her early 40s sitting alone in a clinic with 2 jammed fingers and a number she could not stop thinking about now that someone had put it in her head. 54, she repeated. "Yes. And if you had not told me, would you have just kept tracking it?" "Probably," he admitted. "I have been tracking a lot of heroes. I did not know what to do with the information until recently." "And what do you want to do with it now?" This was the moment. He had rehearsed it in various ways, but rehearsing something and saying it were different weights entirely, and he felt the difference now. "I think I can give it back," he said. "The vitality. I believe the transfer would be permanent, or close to it. It would restore your baseline, possibly beyond it. Your cells would register as biologically younger. The effect on your physical condition would be significant and ongoing." In exchange for what? He had expected this question, had respected, in advance, that she would ask it. "I do not know the full terms yet," he said honestly. "I know that I would need to maintain a monitoring connection, a thread. It runs between us and lets me check in on your biological state over time. It is not intrusive. You would not feel it in a way that would disturb you. But it exists, and I think it would be wrong not to tell you. Like a tether. More like a channel." The information only flows one way unless you need adjustment. She looked at her jammed fingers. Then she looked at him. You are 17 years old, she said. Yes. And you have been developing a biological restoration protocol in your spare time. More or less. In a notebook. Several notebooks, actually. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh but fell somewhere between them. Then she said, show me. Not the notebooks. Show me what you can do. He moved to the table. He held his hands close to her fingers without quite touching, and let the current run, carefully, precisely, a measured output, nothing dramatic, just enough to demonstrate the principle. The swelling began to resolve under the skin. He watched it happen and felt the thread, thin and new and very clean, settle into place. She flexed her finger slowly. The expression on her face was difficult to name. That was 15% of what a full transfer would do, he said. A sample. I felt that, she said quietly. I know. What does it feel like from your end? He considered the question honestly. Like tuning a very good instrument, he said. Like everything is exactly as it should be. She sat with that for a long moment. The ventilation hummed. Outside in the corridor someone walked past laughing at something on their phone. Come to my office Thursday at 6, she said. After hours. Bring your notebooks. He nodded and began rewrapping his collarbone. The first thread was in place, thin and luminous at the edge of his awareness, and he carried it home with him that evening the way you carry a light you have just lit. Chapter 4, The Shape of a Society. Thursday at 6 he brought 3 notebooks. Midnight's office was on the 3rd floor of the faculty wing, a room that had been personalized with the particular intensity of someone who spent a lot of time in it but wanted it to look like she did not care. The bookshelves held an incongruous mix of hero law texts, performance art history, and what appeared to be a well-read collection of Victorian mystery novels. A standing lamp in the corner threw warm light across the desk, where she had cleared space for them and arranged a second chair at a right angle, which meant she had thought about the seating in advance, which meant she was taking this seriously. Izuku sat down, opened the first notebook, and started from the beginning. He talked for an hour and 40 minutes with only 2 breaks. He was aware, during this time, that he was doing a version of something he had been doing his entire life, compiling and organizing and explaining the world he observed, and that for most of his life this had been an activity performed for an audience of one. The fact that she was listening, actually listening, the kind of listening that included follow-up questions and moments where she reached across to look at a diagram more closely, was disorienting in a way he did not entirely know what to do with. She asked about the mice. He showed her the data. She was quiet for a long time after that. The mice, she said carefully, did not age. Not at normal rates, no. The cellular markers are consistent across 18 months of observation. The oldest treated subject is currently showing biological markers consistent with approximately 30% of its chronological age. That is remarkable. It is also reproducible. I have replicated it 4 times with consistent results. And in humans. The sample is 1, he said. Yesterday. A 15% transfer. Not enough data for conclusions, but the directional indicators are consistent with the animal results. She absorbed this. Then she said, you mentioned terms. Yes. Talk to me about terms. He had been thinking about this since Wednesday. He had filled half a new notebook with working through it. The transfer creates a connection, he said. That connection is permanent in the sense that I can feel your biological state at any time without requiring proximity. I would monitor and maintain your condition over time. If there were degradation, I would correct it. If you were injured severely enough to require intervention, I could assist. In return, I would need to trust that you are not going to report this to the school administration or the Hero Commission until I have decided what the right scope of this is. What I can do is significant enough that if it became widely known without the right context, it would be taken out of my hands. I am not ready for that. She nodded slowly. This was not the answer she had expected, he could tell, but it was not the answer she would have refused. What else? I would like your perspective on who else might be a candidate. You know the pro community in ways I do not. You know who is running at a deficit and who is managing and who is simply not going to recover without intervention. She looked at him for a long moment. You are planning to build something. I am trying to figure out what I am building, he said, which was honest. I know it is more than one person. I know it involves women who have been serving this system since before I was born and who have paid a cost the system does not acknowledge. I know I want to correct that. The structure of it, the terms for each person, those I am still working out. But you have two names. It was not a question. He had, in the course of the evening, mentioned both of them in the context of his monitoring data, and she was sharp enough to have heard the specific weight he put on each one. Ryukyu, he said. And the other one is more complicated. Ryukyu, I understand, she said. Tell me the complicated one. He reached into the third notebook, the one he kept separate from the others, and opened it to a page near the back. The page had a name at the top and beneath it a question that he had written and crossed out and rewritten 3 times. Can it reach someone who is no longer living? Midnight looked at the page for a long time without speaking. Nana Shimura, she said quietly. I have been reading everything I can find about the transfer limits, Izuku said. The biology is different when the subject is not currently living. But the principles that govern the deep transfer, the mechanism that makes the restoration permanent rather than temporary, I believe those principles do not require the subject to already be in an active biological state. They require a sufficient structural template. A sufficient trace. That is a different thing than healing someone, she said carefully. That is closer to something I do not have a category for. I know, he said. I am not certain it is possible. I am only certain that I want to try, and that I do not want to try it without telling someone what I am attempting. She was quiet for a while longer. The standing lamp hummed softly. Somewhere outside a door closed. Ryukyu first, she said eventually. Get more data. Establish the pattern. And then, when you are ready, we talk about what else might be possible. That is what I was thinking. Good. She closed the notebook she had been looking at and returned it to him. And Midoriya? Yes? When this becomes a real thing, when it has a shape and a name, I want to be part of building it. Not just the first person you practiced on. He looked at her and saw what she meant entirely. Of course, he said. That is the only way I would want it. She nodded once, satisfied, and they moved on to the next notebook. Chapter 5, Ryukyu. Ryukyu's proper name was Fuyumi Ryuko, and she agreed to meet him on a Saturday at her agency's satellite office in Muzitafu, which was essentially a converted apartment suite on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of dry cleaning fluid and old paper. The office was used for administrative overflow and had the impersonal quality of a space that no one had claimed long enough to leave a mark on. Midnight had made the introduction by a message so carefully worded that it revealed nothing specific, only that a promising student wished to discuss a professional consultation of a sensitive nature and that Midnight vouched for both his seriousness and his discretion. Ryukyu arrived 8 minutes late, in workout clothes, and apologized without elaboration. She was 32 years old, Izuku's records told him. She appeared, to the untrained eye, perhaps 29, perhaps 30. To his eye she appeared considerably more complicated than that. Her biological baseline was scattered in a way he had not seen before, not uniformly depleted the way Midnight's was, but uneven, some systems running near optimal while others had fallen significantly behind. The cellular age in her muscular tissue was consistent with hard training over many years. The cellular age in her endocrine system was consistent with chronic stress. Her vitality reserve was 61%. He had not revised that number since the sports festival observation, but seeing it now from close range, he saw that the 61 was a misleading average. Some parts of her were closer to 80. Others were closer to 40. You are the student, she said, looking him over with frank appraisal. Midoriya Izuku. Yes. Kayama speaks highly of you in a way that is carefully vague, which is how she speaks highly of things she is genuinely impressed by. I will take that as a compliment. It is one. She sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. Tell me what this is about. He told her. He was more practiced now than he had been with Midnight, the sequence was tighter, the terminology more precise, the explanations easier to find. He showed her the notebooks. He showed her the data. He explained the thread without minimizing it. She asked one question while he spoke, which was, "Is Kayama part of this?" "Yes," he said. "She received a partial transfer 10 days ago. I have been monitoring the results. The data is here." He slid a page across the table. She read it twice. Then she looked up. Her markers improved by 11% in 10 days from a 15% transfer. "Yes. The uptake rate is faster than I modeled. I think the body adapts to the restored energy more efficiently than I initially projected, which suggests a full transfer would have compounding rather than additive effects." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "I think a full transfer would restore you to a biological baseline younger than your current chronological age. Not dramatically, but measurably. And sustainably, with periodic maintenance." She sat with that. Outside the window of the satellite office, a delivery person on a bicycle worked their way down the street below. The late morning was bright and cool. "I have been tired," Ryukyu said, without particular emphasis, in the tone of someone stating a fact about the weather. "Since I made the top 10, specifically. Not before. Before it was hard in a way that felt clean. Now it is hard in a way that feels like a leak I cannot find to fix." "The pressure changes the profile," Izuku said. "Higher-ranked heroes receive more media scrutiny, more institutional pressure, more scheduled appearances outside of active duty. The recovery time gets crowded out by the obligations that come with the position. You have modeled this. I have a section on it in the second notebook." She almost smiled. "Of course you do." She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The connection. The thread. Explain it to me again." He did. He was careful about this part, careful to be accurate about what the thread was and what it was not, careful to avoid making it sound either trivial or alarming. It was a channel of information. It ran from her to him. It gave him ongoing visibility into her biological state. It was not control. It was not intrusive in any physical sense. It was more like a number in an address book that rang directly to him if her body needed something corrected. "And you would feel it if I was seriously injured," she said. "Yes. Even at a distance. Yes. Distance does not seem to matter much. I monitor Kayama-sensei accurately from across the campus." Another silence. She was working through it in an organized way, he could see, the way someone who manages large operations thinks through a decision, sequentially, checking each variable before moving to the next. "What do you want in return?" she asked. "Information and discretion, initially. The same agreement I have with Kayama-sensei. Beyond that." He paused. "I am building something. I am not certain of its full shape yet. I would want you to be part of the conversation as the shape becomes clearer. You are asking me to join something that does not have a name yet." "Yes. But I can tell you what it is for. It is for exactly this, for women in this profession who have given everything the system asked of them and been given nothing back. I can give something back. That is what this is." She looked at him for a long time. He met her gaze steadily. "Do it," she said. "The full transfer. You are certain? Do not ask me twice or I will wonder if you are uncertain, and then I will wonder why." He nodded and moved around the table. He placed his hands carefully, one on each shoulder, not gripping, simply present, and let the current run. Not the careful, measured fraction he had given Midnight as a demonstration. The full channel, opened wide, flowing clean and clear. He had planned for this to feel like work. It did not feel like work. It felt like opening a valve that had been closed too long. She was very still. Her breathing slowed. He tracked the changes in her cellular structure with the inner sense that he had spent 2 years learning to read like a language, watched the scattered pattern of her baseline begin to resolve toward coherence, watched the depleted systems draw from the restored reserves, watched the unevenness begin to smooth. The thread, when it settled, was stronger than the one to Midnight. Not louder, but deeper, as though it had found a more substantial anchor. He stepped back. Ryukyu opened her eyes. She looked at her hands, then at the window, then at him. "That," she said, with measured precision, "is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Something that felt like medicine. That felt like she searched for the word and did not find it immediately. When she found it, she said it quietly, youth. He nodded. That is accurate. How old do I read now? He checked. He took his time, reading carefully, letting the full picture assemble. Biologically, he said, approximately 23. She was quiet for a very long moment. Then she said, I want to be in the room when you decide what this becomes. You will be, he said. That was always the agreement. She nodded once, in the way of someone who has made a decision and has no interest in revisiting it, and reached across the table to shake his hand. Chapter 6, What the Archive Held. The question of Nana Shimura lived in the back of his mind the way certain questions do, persistent and unresolved, surfacing whenever he was tired or quiet or working on a problem that required him to push at the edges of what he understood. He did not talk about it with Midnight or Ryukyu yet. Not because he was hiding it, but because he was still building the conceptual framework that would allow him to discuss it without sounding like someone who had not thought carefully about the implications. He was, emphatically, thinking carefully about the implications. He had access to UA's academic library, which was extensive, and to the hero archives, which were restricted to third-year students and above but which Recovery Girl had quietly facilitated access to when he had explained, truthfully, that he was doing independent research on the long-term biological effects of quirk usage in career heroes. Recovery Girl had looked at him for a long time after that explanation. Then she had printed him a temporary access card without asking any follow-up questions, and he had decided that she was either remarkably trusting or considerably more perceptive than she let on, and he suspected the latter. The hero archives held everything. Commission records, medical assessments, mission reports, personal testimonials collected posthumously from the families of fallen heroes. He spent 3 Saturdays in the archive reading room before he found what he was looking for. Nana Shimura's file was not long. This surprised him, because she had been the 7th holder of One for All, one of the most significant figures in hero history, and he had expected documentation commensurate with that significance. Instead, the file was careful and sparse, the way files are when someone has been very precise about what to omit. The medical records were there. The mission logs were there. The personal history sections were notable primarily for what they glossed over. But the medical records were enough. He spent the better part of a Saturday afternoon with them, reading them the way he read everything important, slowly, with a pencil, marking passages that would require separate attention. The records described Nana Shimura in terms of her physical performance, her quirk metrics, her injury recovery rates. They described a body that had been pushed to extraordinary limits and that had, according to every available marker, been in remarkable condition for a woman in her 40s. The cells, if they existed anywhere in a recoverable state, would have structural integrity. That was the first variable. He had been thinking about structural integrity for months, turning the concept over, examining it from different angles. His quirk operated on biological information, on the energy and structural patterning of living cells. What he had been wondering, and what the animal experiments had begun to suggest, was whether the information itself, the pattern, could persist beyond the state of active biological function. In plain language, whether a person could be restored from an imprint. He did not know the answer. He was fairly confident nobody else had ever asked the question in precisely these terms, which meant there was no existing literature to consult and no prior data to check his reasoning against. He was working from principles. The principles suggested it was possible. The principles also suggested it would cost considerably more than a standard transfer. He had thought about this and concluded that the cost was acceptable if the result was what he believed it could be. What he was less certain about was whether acceptable was the right word, or whether he was letting the scale of what he wanted to achieve override his judgment about what he should be doing. He sat in the archive reading room for a long time after he finished with the file. Then he put the notebook away and went to find a vending machine, because he had been sitting for 4 hours and had not eaten anything since breakfast, and the most rigorous planning in the world was worth considerably less when conducted on an empty stomach. The vending machine was in the hallway outside the archive. Midnight was also in the hallway, leaning against the wall with a cup of tea from the faculty lounge, reading something on her phone. She looked up when she heard him. "You have been in there for 4 hours," she observed. How long have you been out here? About 40 minutes. She said this without apology. Ryukyu is coming to Musudafu next Saturday. She wants to see the full data set and talk through what we are building. She said, and I am quoting, that she is tired of being consulted on the edges of a plan that is clearly more developed than you are letting on. She is not wrong, he admitted. I know. Midoriya. She waited until he looked at her. Are you ready to say the name out loud? He put coins in the machine and got a canned coffee. He looked at the can for a moment. I found what I needed in the file, he said. The structural integrity of the records is sufficient. I believe the principles hold. She was quiet. I do not know if I can do it, he said honestly. I have never attempted anything at this scale. But I believe it is possible, and I think if it is possible, I should try, because the alternative is knowing it was possible and not having tried. That is a difficult way to think, she said. Yes. It is also very you. She finished her tea. Tell Ryukyu everything on Saturday. She handles large things better when she has the full picture. I know. He opened the coffee. Midnight Sensei. Yes? Thank you. For the 40 minutes. She made a small, dismissive gesture, the kind that means something without wanting to admit it, and headed back toward the faculty wing. He drank his coffee in the empty hallway and felt the two threads at the edge of his awareness, steady and warm, like two notes of a chord still finding its resolution. Chapter 7, The Meeting in the Satellite Office. On the Saturday after the archive, the three of them sat together for the first time. The satellite office had acquired, in the intervening weeks, a small electric kettle and 3 cups, which Ryukyu had brought and which made the impersonal space feel slightly less impersonal. Midnight had brought a folder. Izuku had brought 4 notebooks and a single typed page, which he had spent considerable time preparing and which contained, in ordered paragraphs, the clearest account he could produce of what he knew, what he believed, and what he intended to do. He read the page aloud. He had decided to read it rather than speak from memory because he wanted the words to be precise, and precision, in his experience, was easier to sustain from a written page than from the air. Ryukyu listened with the stillness of someone who is doing very active mental work beneath a composed surface. Midnight, who had heard parts of this before, listened differently, with the slight forward lean of someone checking a story they already know for internal consistency. When he finished, neither of them spoke immediately. Then Ryukyu said, "You are describing a resurrection." "I am describing a biological restoration from structural imprint data," he said. "Whether that constitutes resurrection is a definitional question I am trying not to get ahead of myself on." "Split the difference and call it what it is," she said, not unkindly. "You are describing bringing someone back." "Yes." "Someone who has been gone for a significant number of years." "Yes." "Who would have no connection to the current world beyond what she left behind and what we could tell her." "Yes." "Which is why the question of her own autonomy and consent is central to whether I attempt this at all. I cannot ask her in advance. That is the complication I have been sitting with for months. The only way to ask her is to succeed first. And if she disagrees, once she is back? Then her disagreement stands," he said immediately. "Whatever she chooses is her choice to make. I would not build this in a way that removed that." Ryukyu and Midnight exchanged a glance. He noted the glance, noted that it was not skeptical, that it was the glance of two people confirming that they had independently reached the same assessment of something. "Tell us the mechanics," Midnight said. "As precisely as you can." He told them. He told them about the structural imprint theory and the animal experiments and the archive data and the cost calculations. He told them that his best estimate put the required transfer at 3 to 4 times the scale of a full vitality restoration. He told them that he had been working on conditioning his own transfer capacity over the past several months with the specific goal of reaching that scale, the way an athlete trains for a lift that is currently beyond their maximum. "And you are close," Ryukyu said. It was not a question. "I think another 6 weeks, he said. "If the conditioning holds. What do you need from us?" He looked at the typed page, though he had it memorized by now. "I need you to help me understand who she was. What she valued. What she would want to know first, when she comes back. I need that information so I can think about how to be present for what happens after, because there will be an after and it will be complicated and she will need people. We can do that, Midnight said. She was legendary within the community. There are people who trained under people who knew her. I can reach out. Carefully, he said. I am always careful, she said, in a tone that acknowledged she was not always careful, but that she would be this time. And the name, Ryukyu said. For what we are building. You said last time it did not have one yet. He had thought about this too. He had filled pages with attempts and crossed them all out for one reason or another. I was thinking about what this is, at its core, he said. Not the mechanics. The purpose. It is about giving something back to women who have given everything to a system that does not give anything back. It is about creating a bond that is chosen rather than assigned, and that is sustained by genuine commitment rather than obligation. That is a description, not a name, Ryukyu observed. I know. I am still working on the name. In the meantime, Midnight said, picking up her tea, what do we call ourselves? He looked at the two women across the table. The threads to each of them were steady and present, the deepest things he had ever built. In 6 weeks or thereabouts there would be a third. For now, he said, we do not call ourselves anything. We just do the work. Ryukyu lifted her cup. Then let us talk about the work. And they did, for 3 hours, and when the afternoon was gone and the evening had come quietly into the satellite office around them, the shape of what they were building was, for the first time, visible from all 3 angles at once. Chapter 8, The Cost of the Possible. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in November when the campus was cold and the trees had given up all their leaves, Izuku sat in the small equipment room at the back of the biology lab and reached the end of his conditioning work. He had not told anyone about this particular evening. He had not told Midnight or Ryukyu or, more notably, anyone in his class, who were variously occupied with midterm preparation and an inter-class training block that had generated approximately 4 minor injuries and 1 long-running argument between Bakugo and Ida about what the definition of excessive force meant in a controlled exercise context. The equipment room was chosen because it was small and quiet and had a locking door, and because the biology lab had, on previous occasions, provided him with privacy for late evening research that he was not ready to explain to a facilities staff person. He had the archive file data reproduced in a separate notebook, checked and rechecked. He had the structural imprint readings he had developed from the medical records, translated into the internal language his quirk used, the notation he had developed over 2 years for describing biological states in terms his mind could process the way other people processed sheet music. He sat with his back against the wall and his notebooks open on the floor beside him and he checked the work one more time. It held. Every calculation came back the same. He closed the notebooks. The transfer of this scale was going to feel different from anything he had attempted before. He knew this the way you know a threshold before you cross it, by everything that has been leading toward it. He had prepared for it the way he prepared for everything important, methodically, carefully, without haste, giving himself every possible advantage. He had slept well for the past 2 weeks. He had eaten carefully. He had not overextended himself in training. He had maintained the existing threads with particular attentiveness, because the threads were his anchors, and he was going to need anchors. He settled his breathing. Then he reached. Not toward anything in the room. Toward the structural imprint in the archive data, which existed as a pattern he had memorized with the same thoroughness with which he had once memorized hero statistics, except that this data carried weight of a different kind entirely. He reached toward the pattern and opened the transfer channel not outward to an existing recipient but inward and then outward simultaneously, constructing a biological framework from the imprint, building it the way a careful hand builds a bridge, piece by piece, checking each connection before moving to the next. It was, as he had known it would be, enormous. He did not describe it afterward as painful, because painful was not quite accurate. It was more like the feeling of lifting something that is at the absolute edge of what you can lift, where the weight is so total that the experience has no room for anything except the act itself. He was entirely present in a way that had no thought in it, only function. Time passed in a way he could not track. And then something changed. The thread, when it formed, was unlike the others. It was not thin, like the one to Midnight. It was not deep, like the one to Ryukyu. It was wide, the way a river is wide, carrying more than he had expected, moving with a force that suggested it was not simply the product of his effort but something that had been waiting to be connected. He felt a pulse of awareness at the other end. He had not expected the awareness to be immediate. He had expected the restoration to take time, to be gradual. Instead there was something at the end of the thread that was unmistakably conscious, a person, oriented and present in a way that could only be described as alive. He opened his eyes. The equipment room was dark. He had been sitting for considerably longer than he realized. He got to his feet slowly, steadied himself against the wall. His hands were trembling very slightly, which was a physiological response to the scale of the transfer rather than weakness, he told himself, and then decided it was probably both. He needed to make 2 phone calls. The first was to Midnight. It rang 4 times before she answered, and when she heard his voice she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You did it. The thread is active," he said. "She is present. I need you to help me think through the next 48 hours. I am on my way," Midnight said. "Do not go anywhere." The second call was to Ryukyu. He did not even finish the sentence before she said, "I will be at the satellite office at 7 tomorrow morning. Be there." He sat down on the floor of the equipment room again, because standing was taking more effort than it needed to. Outside the window the November sky was deep and cold and full of stars. At the edge of his awareness, 3 threads now. 2 that he knew well. One that was new and wide and carried within it the particular quality of a person who had done extraordinary things and was not yet certain where she was but was, unmistakably and completely, present. He breathed in the cold air and held it. Something that had never existed before in the world was now beginning, and the beginning was quiet and specific and would not, he knew, remain quiet for long. The Life Force Alchemist. Act 2, the third thread. Chapter 9, 7 in the morning. The satellite office at 7 in the morning was very different from the satellite office at noon. At noon it held the ambient warmth of a building already inhabited by the day, the sound of traffic filtering up from the street, the particular quality of light that Japanese autumn gives to rooms with south-facing windows. At 7 it was cold and specific, the kind of early hour that makes everything feel provisional, as though the world has not yet committed to becoming itself. Izuku arrived at 6:48. He had taken the first train, standing in the near-empty car with his hands in his pockets, feeling the 3 threads with an attention he could not have switched off if he had wanted to. Midnight's thread was steady, slightly agitated in the way of someone who had slept badly. Ryukyu's was clean and alert, already moving through the morning with the efficiency of someone who had decided what the day required of her before it started. The third thread was the one he could not stop returning to. It was present. It was stable. It had been stable through the night, and he had sat on the floor of the equipment room for 2 hours after his phone calls confirming this, monitoring it with the careful attention of someone watching a flame they have just lit and are not certain will stay. It had stayed. It was, if he read it correctly, awake. He did not know what awake meant in this context. He did not know what the experience was like on the other side of a thread that had formed the way this one had. He knew only that consciousness was there, organized and present, and that whatever Nana Shimura was experiencing in the first hours of a restoration she had not consented to and could not have anticipated, she was experiencing it with the kind of internal steadiness that told him, at the biological level at least, that she was not in distress. This was the best he could say. He was trying not to say more than the data supported. He let himself into the satellite office with the key Ryukyu had given him 6 weeks ago and turned on the electric kettle. By the time it had boiled, Ryukyu was at the door. She came in wearing a long coat over her training clothes and looked at him with the particular expression she reserved for situations that were serious enough to require the setting aside of any conversational buffer. "How long?" she said. "The thread formed at approximately 9:40 last night. It has been stable for just under 10 hours. And you have been monitoring it since?" "Yes." She took off her coat, sat down, and wrapped both hands around the cup he had prepared for her. "Tell me what you can read." Vitality baseline is strong. Biological age reads late 30s, early 40s, consistent with the archive records. The cellular pattern is fully coherent, which is the variable I was most uncertain about. There are no gaps, no discontinuities in the structure. Whatever she is complete. He paused. She is also awake. Has been for approximately 4 hours. 4 hours of being awake and not knowing where or when or how. Yes. Ryukyu was quiet for a moment, working through this in her organized way. Where is she? This was the question he had been turning over since midnight. The restoration had produced a body and a consciousness, but it had produced them into a physical space that had not been prepared, because he had not known the restoration would be immediate. He had expected to have days, perhaps weeks, of gradual materialization during which he could arrange appropriate circumstances. Instead, the thread had become conscious in the same hour it formed, which meant that Nana Shimura had woken up somewhere, and that somewhere was the most urgent variable he currently could not account for. I do not know precisely, he said. The thread gives me her biological state, not her location. But the signal is consistent with someone who is indoors, in a climate-controlled environment. She is not in immediate physical danger. That is something. It is what I have. Midnight arrived 12 minutes later, still in civilian clothes, her professional composure present but operating at approximately 90% capacity, which for midnight was still formidable. She sat down, accepted tea, and looked at Izuku for a long moment. You look like you have not slept, she said. I have not. Are you functional? Sufficiently. She accepted this. Then tell me what we are dealing with. He told them both together, systematically, the same information he had given Ryukyu, with the additional context he had been assembling over the hours of the night. The thread was stable. The consciousness was present. The location was unknown. They had, as he understood it, 2 immediate problems and 1 larger one. The first immediate problem was finding her. The second immediate problem was what to do when they did. The larger problem was that Nana Shimura had been dead for more than 2 decades, and whatever she encountered when she interacted with the present world would be, by any measure, overwhelming. She was a hero, Ryukyu said. She trained people. She made decisions under conditions that would break most people. She is not someone who will be incapacitated by difficulty. No, Izuku agreed. But difficulty and the particular kind of cognitive vertigo that comes from waking into a world that has moved 30 years without you are different categories. We should find her first, Midnight said. Then worry about the vertigo. Yes. The question is how. You said the thread tells you her biological state. Does it tell you anything directional? Any sense of distance? He had been testing this since midnight. Not precisely. But the signal intensity varies. It has been getting very slightly stronger over the past 2 hours, which could indicate she is moving toward me, or it could indicate her own vitality is stabilizing and the thread is consolidating. Or both, Ryukyu said. Or both. He set down his cup. I think she is looking for something. The pattern of the signal, the way it pulses, it is not the pattern of someone sitting still. The 3 of them sat with this for a moment. Then Midnight said, she was connected to All Might. And All Might is connected to you. The room became very quiet. Izuku had been avoiding this thought. Not because it was wrong but because it was too large and had too many edges and he was not certain he had the energy to hold it carefully at 7 in the morning after a sleepless night. But it was there, and Midnight had named it, and there was no ungetting it from the air. She might be trying to find him, he said slowly. Or someone associated with him. Which means she might be heading toward UA. Ryukyu set down her cup with a precise, deliberate movement. Then we should be at UA. Chapter 10, The Woman in the Courtyard. They found her in the east courtyard of UA's outer grounds at 8:43 in the morning, sitting on a stone bench near the ornamental garden that the first-year support course maintained as a practicum project. She was wearing clothes that did not belong to this decade. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have made her immediately conspicuous from a distance. A plain dark jacket, dark trousers, the kind of clean, practical clothing that a person who spent their life in demanding physical work would have chosen for comfort and durability. But the cut was wrong. The fabric was wrong in the way that fabric from a specific era is wrong, carrying the exact stylistic signature of its time the way a photograph does. Anyone who looked carefully would have noticed. Nobody was looking carefully, because it was Saturday morning and the grounds were largely empty, the weekend training schedules not beginning until 10. She was looking at the UA building. Izuku felt the thread pulse when he came through the outer gate, felt it respond to his proximity with the particular quality he had been monitoring all night, and understood in the same moment that she felt it too. She turned before he reached the garden path. Not sharply, not with alarm, but with the alert stillness of someone who has been trained to notice things and who has learned to trust their instincts about what those things mean. She was, in person, different from the photographs in the archive in the way that all people are different from their documentation. The photographs had shown a composed, powerful woman in the full authority of her professional prime. The person on the bench was that woman and also something more, something the photographs could not have captured because it required dimension and presence and the particular quality of eyes that had seen a great many things and processed them without flinching. She was also, Izuku noted automatically, reading at biological age approximately 38, which was correct, and at a vitality reserve of 94%, which was considerably above the baseline he had transferred and suggested that her body was continuing to consolidate the restoration beyond the initial transfer point. She looked at him for a long moment. "You," she said. Her voice was lower than he had expected, measured in the way of someone who had spent years learning to project authority without volume. "Yes," he said. "The thread. Yes. I am Midoriya Izuku. I am a second-year student here. I am the one who did this, and I have a great deal to explain to you, and I am sorry that the circumstances of your waking were not what I would have chosen if I had been able to choose them." She looked at him for another moment, then at Midnight and Ryukyu, who had stopped a respectful distance behind him. Then she looked back at him. "How long?" she said. It was not quite a question. He knew what she was asking. "Approximately 23 years, he said. "By the official record." She received this without visible reaction. The stillness in her face was not blankness. It was the active, working stillness of a person processing something enormous with the full force of their intelligence. "Tashinori," she said. The name was quiet. "He is alive," Izuku said immediately. "He is retired. He is well. He is here at UA as a teacher." He paused. "He knows me. We are close. I can take you to him, or I can arrange for him to come here, whichever you prefer. But I wanted to be the first person you spoke to, because I am the one responsible for this, and I thought it was important that you understand what happened and from whom before anything else." She looked at him again. Something moved through her expression that was not quite reassessment and not quite warmth and was perhaps the beginning of both. "You are very young," she said. "I am aware of that. And you did this." "Yes." "How?" "Sit down with us," he said gently. "I will tell you everything. I promise it will make sense by the end, even if it does not make sense at the beginning." She looked at the bench, then at the three of them, then at the UA building behind him. The November morning was very still. A sparrow moved through the ornamental garden, industrious and unconcerned. "Coffee first," she said. "There is a kettle at the satellite office," Ryukyu offered, with a careful steadiness. "Then lead the way." She rose from the bench with the ease of someone who has just discovered that their body is considerably more capable than they had spent a weary morning testing it to be, and she walked with them across the courtyard toward the gate, and Izuku felt the third thread settle into something that was not simply monitoring but was, he thought, the specific quality of a bond that had just been acknowledged by both ends for the first time. He kept pace beside her. She did not speak. Neither did he. The sparrow followed them to the edge of the garden and then turned back. Chapter 11, Everything, carefully. He talked for 2 hours. Nana Shimura listened the way she appeared to do everything, with complete presence and without interruption except for the occasional question that landed precisely on the exact point that most needed clarification. She asked about the mechanics in specific, technical language that made it clear she had a scientific mind beneath the heroic one. She asked about the threads with the direct practicality of someone who needed to understand exactly what they had consented to, retroactively, and what the implications were going forward. She asked about Midnight and Ryukyu with the attentiveness of a person taking inventory of who was in the room and what their stake in it was. She did not ask about All Might. She was saving that. Izuku understood this. He had prepared for it the way he had prepared for every part of this morning, by thinking through every likely response and making sure he had an honest answer for each one. The honest answer about All Might was the most complicated, because it required explaining not only the man Toshinori Yagi currently was but the man he had been in the years between her death and his retirement, the scale of what he had carried and what it had cost him, the state he was in now. He also needed to tell her about Tomura Shigaraki. He had thought about when to do this and had decided it should come after the foundation was established. She needed to understand what she had returned to before she learned the hardest thing about what had happened in her absence. The hardest thing was not the world having moved on. The hardest thing was the child she had entrusted to others and what had become of that entrusting. But that was not now. That was later, when she was steadier and the room was quieter. Now he was explaining the three threads. Midnight sat to his left, Ryukyu across the table, and Nana Shimura at the end, her coffee cup held in both hands, her attention unbroken. The connection I have with Kayama-sensei and Ryukyu, he said, is ongoing. It gives me visibility into their biological state. I can feel when something is wrong and intervene before it becomes serious. For them, the practical effect is the restoration we have discussed, maintained in perpetuity as long as I am present to maintain it. And your thread to me, she said, is the same, but the formation was different because the circumstances were different. The thread to you is stronger than the others. I am still understanding why. The scale of the transfer, Ryukyu said. Possibly. Or something about the nature of a structural imprint restoration versus a living baseline restoration. The threads feel different in ways I do not yet have precise language for. Nana Shimura set down her cup. Can you feel it from my end? The thread. He considered the question with the honesty it deserved. I can feel its quality. Right now it carries something that reads as active and very focused. Like a person who is paying close attention. She made a sound that was not quite amusement. An accurate read. She looked out the satellite office window at the November Street. I woke up in a maintenance shed on the east side of the campus. I spent an hour determining where I was. Then I spent another hour determining approximately when. The cellular age, the state of my body, those took time to assess. I spent the last 2 hours walking the perimeter of the grounds and looking for anything I recognized. What did you find? The structure of the school has changed. The training grounds have expanded significantly. The dormitory block is new. She paused. The gate is the same. There was something in this last sentence that was not sentiment, exactly, but was in the direction of it. I thought about leaving the campus, she continued. Going into the city to orient myself more broadly. But the thread pulled more strongly toward the school, and I have spent enough years trusting directional instincts to know when one is reliable. So I sat down in that courtyard and waited to see what would come. And I came, Izuku said. And you came. She looked at him with an expression that was still in the process of becoming whatever it was going to be. You are the holder. He did not ask what she meant. Yes. He passed it on. Yes. Several holders before me. The full lineage is documented, if you want to see it. I will want to see it. She was quiet for a moment. And he is well. He is well. He lost the quirk, but the manner of the loss was his choice, made in a moment that mattered. He is at peace with it, I think, though I will not speak for what it cost him to reach that peace. She nodded slowly. This confirmed something rather than resolved it. There were questions behind the nod that she was holding in reserve, and he respected their weight. What do I do now? She asked. Not with desperation, not with the tone of someone who has lost their footing and needs someone else to direct them. With the practical directness of a person who has assessed a situation and is ready to act and simply needs the operational parameters. Izuku had thought about this too. He had 3 pages of notes on it in the notebook he had not brought this morning because he had not wanted it to look like he had 3 pages of notes on what to do when Nana Shimura woke up, even though he did. In the immediate term, he said, you need documentation, clothing appropriate to this decade, and a place to stay that is private enough to give you space to orient. Kayama-sensei has capacity and the discretion required. Ryukyu has a secondary residence she has offered. We can discuss which option suits you better once you have heard both. In the medium term? We tell Yagi-sensei. With your consent and at your pace. Not before you are ready. And in the longer term? He looked at her steadily. That is yours to determine. I have brought you back. What you do with that is entirely your decision. I have ideas, but they are secondary to what you want. She looked at him for a long moment. The November light through the window shifted as a cloud moved across the sun. You have ideas, she said. Yes. Tell me one. He had been waiting for this. I think you could be remarkable at this, he said carefully. At what we are building. Not because of what your quirk can do, though that matters, but because of what you understand. You have seen this system from the inside, from its beginning, at a level that none of us have access to. The things you know about how power works and what it costs and who pays that cost are things that the three of us have been trying to map from the outside. With you in this room, we do not need to map from the outside anymore. Nana Shimura was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, make me more coffee. And then tell me everything about what you are building, from the very beginning. Midnight reached for the kettle. Ryukyu opened the notebook that lived permanently on the satellite office shelf now. Izuku turned to the first page and started again from the beginning, and this time the audience was 4. Chapter 12, The Weight of 23 Years. She was not fragile. This was the first and most important thing Izuku confirmed in the days that followed, and it recalibrated every piece of planning he had done. He had prepared, with considerable care, for someone who needed to be brought into the present slowly, who would require sustained emotional support, who might struggle with the cognitive and psychological weight of displacement and would need the scaffolding of the three of them holding the world steady while she found her feet. He had read what he could find about psychological recovery from severe disruption, had consulted indirectly with a therapist at the university hospital under the guise of a class research project, had assembled a framework for support that was thorough and careful and almost entirely unnecessary. Nana Shimura did not need the scaffolding in the way he had anticipated. What she needed was information, delivered promptly and completely, and the respect of being told the difficult things directly rather than at a considered pace. She asked about Shigaraki on the second day. She had been staying at Midnight's apartment, which was on the 7th floor of a building 2 streets from campus and which had the advantage of being both comfortable and defensible, which was not a quality Izuku had thought to evaluate in accommodations until Nana Shimura, on her first evening there, walked through the apartment making a quiet, systematic assessment of exit points and sightlines. Midnight had watched this with an expression of someone who had been reminded that their guest was a great deal more than she had allowed herself to fully visualize. On the second morning, over breakfast, Nana Shimura looked at Izuku across the table and said, "Tell me about my grandson." He had known it was coming. He had not known exactly when, and he had not known how precisely she already understood the shape of what she was asking, but looking at her face in that moment he thought that she knew quite a lot and was asking not to be told the broad facts but to understand the texture of them. He told her. He told her about Shigaraki Tomura, the man he had become, the path that had made him, the particular cruelty of the making. He told her about the hands. He told her about All for One and the deliberate, systematic destruction of a child's connection to everyone who might have helped him become something different. He told her these things in a direct, measured voice without softening them, because she had asked him not to soften anything, and he honored that. She listened with the same complete stillness she brought to everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a time that was long enough to mean that she was processing it fully, not simply filing it away to process later. "The responsibility is mine," she said finally. "No," he said immediately. "I gave him up to protect him." The protection failed. She said this with clarity, not self-pity, the way a person names a fact they have examined from every angle and found unavoidable. "You gave him up because the alternative was his death," Izuku said. "The failure was not yours. The failure was All for One's, and the failure of everyone who should have protected a child and did not. The responsibility for what Shigaraki became belongs to the person who made him what he is. And yet you carry it. I know. I am not trying to remove it from you. I am only saying that the weight is not the same as the fault." She looked at him for a moment. "You have thought about this." "I have thought about almost everything associated with this situation for quite a long time," he said. I have had months to prepare. You have had 2 days. I would prefer you did not try to resolve everything in the first week. I am not trying to resolve it. I am trying to understand it. She picked up her coffee. There is a difference. Understanding does not require resolution. This was, he thought, a more sophisticated framing than most people would have brought to the same grief, and it confirmed what he had been learning about her since the courtyard, which was that Nana Shimura processed the world with a combination of emotional directness and intellectual rigor that was, in his experience, genuinely rare. Midnight came into the kitchen and understood from the quality of the silence that something important had just concluded. She poured herself coffee and sat down without asking what it had been. I want to see the city, Nana Shimura said, after a moment. Not the school. The city. I want to understand what 23 years looks like in ordinary life, not in documentation. Today? Midnight asked. If the scheduling permits. I have nothing until 4. Then today. Izuku looked at his phone. He had a training session at 10 and a theory seminar at 2. He made a decision and sent 2 messages, one to Aizawa explaining a personal obligation, one to Yaoyorozu asking for her theory seminar notes. I will come, he said. Nana Shimura looked at him. You are going to miss class. Yes. For me. The theory seminar is on analytical frameworks for large-scale villain operations, he said. I have read the source material. I can afford to miss it. She considered this. Then something that had been careful and composed in her expression for 2 days shifted fractionally, became something slightly warmer, and she said, all right. After breakfast. They went into the city, the 3 of them, and spent 5 hours walking through it. Izuku watched Nana Shimura navigate the 23-year gap with the methodical attention of a person doing field research on a civilization they have read about extensively but never directly observed. She stopped at a convenience store for 6 minutes. She stood outside a train station entrance and watched the display board. She asked 3 questions about phone infrastructure that were so technically precise that Midnight, answering them, found herself more thoroughly examined than she had expected. In the late afternoon, coming back through the shopping district near the campus, Nana Shimura stopped in front of a sporting goods store and looked at the window display for a long moment. The hero merchandise is different, she said. It changes with the rankings, Izuku said. She turned to look at him. Is yours in there? Not yet. I am a student. Not yet, she repeated, and the warmth in her voice was unguarded in a way that made him look at the window and not at her, because he was not certain what to do with being looked at like that. Chapter 13, What She Knew. The question of All Might had to happen on a Saturday, because Saturday was when Toshinori Yagi took his long walk. This was something Izuku had learned in his first year at UA, when he had still been adjusting to the reality of attending the same school as his former mentor and the complications that presented. Yagi-sensei walked every Saturday morning, early, before the grounds filled with training schedules and administrative traffic. He walked the perimeter of the outer campus, which took approximately 40 minutes, and he did it alone. It was, Izuku understood, the kind of solitary ritual that a person who had lived at an extreme pitch of public attention for 30 years builds around themselves like a small, necessary structure of privacy. He had told Nana Shimura about the walk on Wednesday. He had said, he does this every Saturday. If you want the first meeting to be private and on terms you control, Saturday morning is when you would have it. She had thought about this for a full day before she said yes. On Friday evening she sat with Izuku in the satellite office, just the 2 of them, and she talked about All Might for the first time at length. Not about what had happened to him in the years after her death, which Izuku had already covered, but about who he had been before. She talked about him with the particular directness of someone who had known a person at the most formative point of that person's development, who had watched the shape of who they would become emerge from the raw material of who they were. He listened the way he had listened to everything she said, which was completely, with the notebook open but the pencil mostly still. He was not ready to carry one for all when I gave it to him, she said. He was ready to try to be ready, which is a different thing. Most of the people who have held this quirk have had that in common. A willingness to reach for something that is bigger than they are and trust that they will grow into it. It worked, Izuku offered. It worked, she agreed. It also cost him everything it cost him, and the cost was real regardless of the outcome. She turned her cup in her hands. He was always going to push himself past every reasonable limit. That was not a failure of the training. It was the nature of who he was. I knew it and I trained around it as much as I could, and in the end it was not enough to prevent what it was not going to prevent. You could not have predicted All for One's direct intervention, Izuku said. No. But I could have built more of a support structure around him. More people who knew the full situation. I was protective of the secret to a degree that left him isolated. She was quiet for a moment. I did not want to make the same mistake with the people who mattered to me that I had made with Kotaro. So I made the opposite mistake instead. I protected the secret instead of the person. Izuku said nothing. There was nothing to say that would improve on her own understanding of it. I am telling you this, she said, because I think you are at risk of making a similar error in a different direction. He looked up. You have built something with the three of us, she said. You have been careful and honest and I think genuinely respectful of our autonomy in a way that is unusual for someone your age. But the scope of what you can do is significant, and the structure you are building around it is still small. 3 people, for now. A satellite office and some notebooks. She met his gaze. At some point the scope of this is going to exceed the capacity of that structure, and when it does, the question of how you hold it together will matter enormously. I know, he said. Tell me what you are planning for that. I am planning to keep going the way I have been going, he said. One person at a time. Terms established before the transfer. No one added without understanding fully what they are agreeing to. And the Hero Commission? Not until I have to. The moment this becomes institutional, the nature of it changes. It will become institutional eventually. I know. I am trying to build the foundation before that happens so that the foundation is strong enough to determine the terms of the institutionalization rather than the other way around. She looked at him for a long moment. That is either very smart or very naive, and I genuinely cannot yet tell which. Possibly both, he said. Possibly. She set down her cup. Tomorrow morning, then. The walk. I will tell him tonight that there is someone who wants to speak with him. I will not tell him who. I think the knowledge needs to come from you, in person, in your own words and in your own time. She nodded once. He recognized the nod. It was the same nod with which Ryukyu had confirmed her own transfer, the nod of someone who has made a decision and does not require further processing. He went to find Yagi-sensei that evening. The conversation was brief. Izuku knocked on the faculty apartment door at 8 o'clock and Yagi-sensei opened it in a cardigan and reading glasses, looking pleasantly surprised. Izuku said, "There is someone on the grounds who wishes to speak with you tomorrow morning. Someone from before. I would ask you to trust me that the meeting is safe and important, and to go to the East Courtyard at 7:15. Yagi-sensei looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Before." How long before? A long time, Izuku said. Long enough that it will be a great deal to hold. But I think you will want to hold it. Yagi-sensei took his glasses off and pressed his fingers to his eyes for a moment. When he looked back up, his expression was something Izuku could not fully name, something that was not quite grief and not quite hope and was perhaps the space between them where very important things live. 7:15, Yagi-sensei said. Yes. I will be there. Izuku walked back to the dormitory and sat on his bed and felt the 3 threads, all of them slightly elevated, carrying the quality of people who are preparing themselves for something significant. He did not try to read more than that. Some things, he had come to understand, deserved to happen without being observed. Chapter 14, The East Courtyard, again. He did not go to the East Courtyard on Saturday morning. This was intentional. The meeting between Nana Shimura and Toshinori Yagi was not his to witness or mediate or support. He had done what was needed to make it possible. What happened inside it was between them and required no third presence, no monitor, no careful observer with a notebook. He sat in the common room of the dormitory instead, with a cup of tea and his analysis notebook open to a blank page that stayed blank for most of the morning. Uraraka came down at 8 and found him there. She made her own tea and sat in the chair across from him and did not ask what he was thinking about, which was, once again, one of the things he most appreciated about the people who knew him well enough to know when not to ask. At 9:47 he felt the thread to Nana Shimura shift. Not alarm. Not distress. Something that was the biological signature of intense emotion processed by a body with an extremely high capacity for self-regulation. The thread read like a person who had been through something enormous and was, with great deliberateness, choosing to stay upright. He checked it twice and then let it be. Whatever the meeting had contained, she was managing it. At 10:30, Midnight sent him a message, "They are still talking. Do not worry." He was, in fact, worrying. He made a note about this in the blank notebook page, specifically a note about the fact that the presence of the threads gave him information that was genuinely useful and also, in certain circumstances, gave him information he did not know what to do with. Knowing that Nana Shimura was going through something significant without being able to help was its own kind of difficulty. He would add this to the growing list of things about the threads that required further thought. They returned to the satellite office at noon, all four of them, and the quality of the room when they came in was different from any previous meeting. Yagi-sensei was with them. He was in his civilian form, thinner than the public knew him to be, wearing a pale blue shirt and the expression of someone who had recently experienced something that had rearranged the furniture of their inner life and had not yet decided where everything went. He looked at Izuku when he came in, and Izuku looked back at him, and for a moment they simply held each other's gaze with the particular weight of two people who share a significant history and who are each adjusting to a new variable in that history. "You did this," Yagi-sensei said. Not accusation. Not surprise. Something quieter. "Yes," Izuku said. "And the others?" He looked at Midnight and Ryukyu. "Part of what we are building," Izuku said. "With their full knowledge and consent and on terms they helped establish." Yagi-sensei was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Nana Shimura, who was standing by the window with her arms folded, watching this exchange with the alert attention she brought to everything. "He is like you described," she said. "When he was very small." Yagi-sensei made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else entirely. "He is. Except for the size," she said. "Except for that." The five of them sat down together. Izuku served tea because it was something concrete to do and because the room needed a moment to settle into whatever it was becoming. He served it carefully, attending to each person with the kind of quiet attention that did not require acknowledgement. When he sat down, Nana Shimura looked at him and then at the group and said, "Tell me what the plan is." "From the beginning." "All of it." He looked at Yagi-sensei. Yagi-sensei looked back at him and nodded very slightly. Izuku opened his notebook to the first ordered page and began to explain, for the third time in a week, everything he had been building and why, and this time the room held 5 people, and one of them was the man who had started it all by handing a notebook back to a boy on a rooftop and telling him he could become a hero, and the weight of that fact sat quietly in the room with all of them and was not named and did not need to be. Chapter 15, The Architecture of Trust. 3 weeks after the East Courtyard, the satellite office had changed. This was partly practical. The small folding table had been replaced with a proper work table, which Ryukyu had arranged, and there were now 5 chairs of matching quality and a whiteboard on the wall that Midnight had installed on a Thursday afternoon with a portable mounting kit and the cheerful efficiency of someone who had decided that a whiteboard was going to exist in this room whether or not the building management had opinions about it. But the change was not only practical. It was the change of a space that is being used for something real, the gradual accumulation of presence and purpose that makes a room feel inhabited rather than occupied. Nana Shimura had taken to the whiteboard with the enthusiasm of a person who had spent a career thinking about large problems and who had been temporarily deprived of a surface large enough to map them on. She had, over the course of the 3 weeks, produced 3 diagrammatic analyses of hero society that were so precisely constructed and so thoroughly observed that Ryukyu had taken photographs of each one before they were erased, and Midnight had sat with the 3rd one for so long that Nana Shimura had, eventually, told her to stop looking like it was a painting and ask the question she clearly had. The question Midnight had asked was, how do we grow this without losing what makes it work? This was the question they were now all asking, in various forms, in every meeting. Izuku's answer, which he had been refining over the same 3 weeks, was, we grow it exactly one person at a time, with the same rigor and the same care for each edition, and we do not grow it faster than I can maintain the threads without degradation. What is your current limit? Nana Shimura asked, on a Wednesday afternoon when this question had become the central topic for the third consecutive meeting. I do not know precisely, he said honestly. The three of you are well within comfortable range. The monitoring does not feel effortful. There is a threshold somewhere, but I have not found it yet because I have not added enough threads to approach it. So we need to find the threshold without exceeding it, Ryukyu said. Yes. Carefully. You are saying you want to add more people. I am saying I think the purpose of this requires more people to fulfill it properly. He had been thinking about this for weeks and had a section of the fourth notebook devoted to it. What we have identified, between the four of us, is a systematic failure mode in hero society. The failure is structural. The system extracts peak performance from its heroes and does not provide meaningful compensation for the biological and psychological cost of that extraction. The result is a generation of women who have given everything to a system that will pension them off when their performance declines and give no acknowledgement to the decline it caused. You want to fix all of them, Midnight said. I want to fix as many as I can sustain. That is a different proposition. It is still a very large proposition. Yes. The whiteboard currently showed a diagram that Nana Shimura had produced 2 days earlier and which had not been erased because they kept returning to it. It mapped the top 30 ranked female heroes by vitality reserve, a set of estimates that Izuku had assembled over 18 months of careful observation, and it was not encouraging. Of the 30, 22 were operating at reserves below 70%. 7 were below 50. 2 were in territory that Izuku had quietly designated as critical. He had not told anyone about the 2 yet. He was holding that for the right moment. We need criteria, Nana Shimura said, looking at the diagram. Not just capacity limits on your end. Criteria for who we approach and how and in what order. I have some thoughts on that, Ryukyu said. So do I, Midnight said. So do I, Izuku said. They spent the rest of the afternoon working through it. The conversation was the most structurally complex they had yet had, covering practical considerations, ethical considerations, priority ranking, and the fundamental question of whether there was a meaningful distinction between helping someone because they needed it and helping someone because they were strategically useful to the larger project. Izuku's position on this last question was that the distinction mattered and should be held carefully even when it was inconvenient, and that anyone added to what they were building should be added primarily because of the first reason and only incidentally because of the second. Nana Shimura's position was that in practice these two things were not as separable as he wanted them to be, and that trying to maintain a clean separation between them would eventually produce decisions that felt principled but were not functional. They argued about this for 40 minutes. It was the first time they had argued about anything directly, and it was not unpleasant. It had the quality of an argument between two people who are thinking in the same direction but from different distances and who are each, in the process of the argument, updating their map. By the end of the afternoon they had a preliminary framework. Not final. Nothing was final at this stage. But it was written on the whiteboard in 3 columns, and it was the most coherent version of the answer to the question Midnight had asked 3 weeks ago that they had yet produced. How do we grow this without losing what makes it work? Carefully. Together. One person at a time. Izuku looked at the whiteboard for a long time after the others had left. Then he opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote, at the top, 2 names that had been at the back of his mind for weeks, 2 heroes in the category he had privately labeled critical. He looked at the names. He thought about the 2 critical threads he could already feel at the edge of his awareness, present without being established, the biological signatures of 2 women who were spending themselves in ways that the whiteboard diagram described clearly and that only he could see. He closed the notebook. It was late and he had a training session at 6 in the morning. But the names were written, and written things had a way of becoming plans. Chapter 16, the 2 in the critical column. The first name was Mirko. Rumi Usagiyama was the 5th-ranked hero and the most physically demanding case on the entire diagram. Her reserve read at 43%, which was the lowest of any active top 10 hero, and the cellular pattern that Izuku could read from the monitoring he had been conducting since her last public appearance was not simply depleted but actively combative, the pattern of a body that was fighting its own depletion with the same relentless intensity with which she apparently fought everything else. The second name was Uwabami. This was less expected. Uwabami was not top-ranked in the way that Mirko was, but she was a hero who had been active for a significant number of years and who had, in addition to heroic duties, taken on a substantial commercial media presence, which meant that her schedule carried the biological cost of performance in two high-demand domains simultaneously. Her reserve was 48%. Her cellular age markers were consistent with someone a decade older than her chronological age. She was, in the clinical language of his notebook, burning faster than she was restoring. He had been watching both of them for different lengths of time and from different contexts, and approaching either one presented different logistical and personal challenges. Mirko was direct. This was a matter of public record. She would respond to a direct approach better than to a circuitous one, and she would respond to data over appeals, and she would require a transfer to be framed on terms she controlled or she would not accept it at all. These things he knew from observation and from what Ryukyu, who had interacted with her at several interagency events, had told him. Uwabami was more complicated because she was, by the nature of her dual role, media-aware in a way that made her careful about associations. Anything that looked like a relationship that could become a story would be approached cautiously, and what Izuku was offering was, by any measure, a story if it ever became one. He discussed both cases with the four of them on a Thursday evening. Nana Shimura, who had been sitting with the diagram for a week, looked at Mirko's column entry and said, "She will not come to you. You will have to be visible to her first." What does that mean in practice? It means she needs to see who you are in a context that has nothing to do with what you are offering. She needs to form her own assessment of you before the offer is on the table, because if the offer comes before the assessment will be of the offer, and not of you. That is a meaningful distinction, Ryukyu said. It is the distinction between someone agreeing to something because it seems reasonable and someone agreeing to something because they have decided the person behind it can be trusted, Nana Shimura said. For Mirko, the second is the only kind of agreement that will hold. How do I make myself visible to her without engineering the encounter? Izuku asked. What does she care about? Midnight asked. Combat excellence. Physical limits and what happens beyond them. Independence. Not owing anyone anything. Then be excellent in a way she can see. Not performed excellence. Real excellence in the domain she respects. Izuku thought about this. The winter tournament, he said. The interagency training event. 3rd years and above, but there is a guest category for notable underclassmen. Can you get in? I was asked and declined last year because the timing conflicted with a research project. He paused. I could accept this year. Then accept, Nana Shimura said. And be remarkable. The encounter will happen if the excellence is real. She does not miss things. For Uwabami, the strategy was different. Midnight knew her tangentially through the professional circuit and offered to make an introduction in a context sufficiently neutral that the media antenna would not activate. A faculty consultation, framed as career mentorship for a promising student. Uwabami had done this kind of consultation before. It was visible enough to be professional, private enough to be useful. She will know something is different when it starts, Midnight said. She is sharp. She will feel the read. I am going to tell her the truth before she figures it out, Izuku said. The read is part of it. I have learned from the first 3 meetings that the approach works better when the unusual thing is named up front rather than revealed gradually. That is a hard way to open a consultation, Midnight observed. Yes. But it is the honest way, and I think she will respond better to direct honesty than to a slow reveal that might feel like manipulation in retrospect. Nana Shimura was watching him with the particular attention she had been giving him increasingly over the past 3 weeks, the attention of someone taking accurate measure of a thing. You have gotten better at this, she said. At what? At understanding what each person needs from the approach. You are not applying the same framework to every case. You are reading the person and adapting. He considered this. I have had good teachers, he said. You had the capacity before the teachers, she said. We have only been confirming what was already there. He looked at the diagram on the whiteboard. 2 names in the critical column, two different approaches, two different paths to the same offer. Above them, 20 more names in varying shades of urgency, and above those the structural diagram that mapped the system producing the depletion in the first place. The scale of it, when he looked at it directly, was enormous. He looked at it directly and held it without flinching, the way Nana Shimura had taught him by example to hold difficult things, and then he opened his notebook and began working out the details of the winter tournament application. Chapter 17, Consultation. Iwabami's agency was in a glass tower in the Minato ward, 12 floors up, and the elevator lobby on her floor had 3 framed magazine covers on the wall, all of them featuring the snake hero in varying degrees of professional glamour. Izuku looked at them while he waited and noted that in the most recent cover, which was from 14 months ago, the biological markers he could read even from a photograph were measurably different from the ones in the oldest cover, which was from 6 years back. He had been reading people from photographs for several months now, as a way of extending his longitudinal data sets. It worked with varying degrees of accuracy depending on image quality and the circumstances of the photograph. He had a separate section of his 5th notebook devoted to the methodology and its limitations. The assistant showed him in at 3 minutes past the appointment time. Iwabami's office was expensively furnished in a way that was precisely calibrated to suggest natural elegance rather than deliberate effort, which meant a considerable amount of effort had gone into it. She was standing at the window when he came in, looking out at the city, and she turned with the practiced ease of someone who has been photographed in many doorways and has internalized the most flattering angle for each approach. She looked at him, and he felt her take stock of him, and he took stock of her in the same moment. 48%. Up 1 point from his most recent external reading, which suggested the last 2 weeks had been slightly less demanding than the months preceding them. The cellular age markers were consistent with what the photographs had shown. Midoriya-kun, she said. Her voice was warm and measured, the voice of someone who was genuinely good at warmth and had also spent years developing it professionally. Kayama-san speaks well of you. Sit down. Thank you for seeing me, he said. He sat. She sat across from him, crossed her legs, and folded her hands. The snakes in her hair moved with the soft, continuous attentiveness of animals that are not restless but are always aware. Kayama-san said you were interested in career mentorship, she said. Specifically in the intersection of public-facing heroics and long-term sustainability. That is one way to describe it, he said. I want to be honest with you about what the actual subject is before we go further, because I think you deserve to know precisely what you have been asked to give your time to. One of the snakes oriented toward him more precisely. Iwabami's expression did not change, but her attention sharpened in a way he could feel. All right, she said. My quirk is broader than its official description, he said. He had found, over the past 3 conversations of this kind, that this was the best opening, the one that gave the person enough information to stay engaged without front-loading the extraordinary so hard that the context had not yet built to support it. The official description is vitality manipulation with cellular repair applications. The complete description includes the ability to read biological age and vitality reserve accurately in any living subject, and the ability to transfer vitality permanently. Permanently, she repeated. The transfer creates a restoration that does not require ongoing input to maintain, though I do maintain ongoing monitoring. The subject's biological baseline resets to a significantly younger state and remains there. She was quiet for a moment, watching him with a precision that matched the attentiveness of the snakes. You have been reading me since you sat down, she said. Yes. I was reading you before I sat down. What do you read? He told her the number. He told her the cellular age discrepancy. He told her that the pattern was consistent with dual-domain performance demands and chronic under-recovery, and that at the current rate of decline she was looking at significant functional reduction within approximately 3 years. She received this without visible disruption, the way people who have been managing something they suspect is serious receive the confirmation of it. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after that confirmation, a quiet that is not shock but is the process of a careful person deciding what to do with a fact they have been living around for some time. Kayama-san has received a transfer, she said. Yes. 8 weeks ago. Her current reserve is 81% and continuing to consolidate. And Ryukyu. He had not told Iwabami that Ryukyu was part of this, and for a moment he recalculated. Then he understood. Iwabumi moved in circles where she would notice changes in the people around her. She was very good at noticing things. She had simply noticed. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. One of the snakes rested its head gently on her shoulder. What do you want from this? She asked. Not what you are offering. What do you want? It was the most precisely aimed question anyone had asked him in any of these conversations, and he felt, in the moment of answering it, the weight of it. I want to build something that lasts, he said. I want to create a structure where the cost that this profession extracts from women is acknowledged and compensated and not simply absorbed until there is nothing left to absorb. I want the people who have given everything to a system that does not give back to have something that does. I want to be the person who does that giving, and I want to do it on terms that are honest and mutual and chosen. He paused. I also want the specific, named women who are running at critical reserves to stop losing ground before they cannot recover it. That is the immediate want. The larger want is everything I just described. The room was quiet. That is either the most idealistic thing I have heard from someone your age, Iwabumi said, or the most adult. I cannot decide which. They are not mutually exclusive, he said. She considered him. Then she said, tell me about the thread. Everything. Do not spare the detail. He told her everything. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting except to ask 3 precise questions, each of which demonstrated that she was tracking both the technical content and the implications, all of them simultaneously. At the end she said, I need a week. I need a week. Of course. And I want to speak with Kiyama-san independently before I decide. I would expect that. I will ask her to be available. She nodded. She walked him to the elevator herself, which he had not expected, and in the lobby of the elevator she looked at the magazine covers on the wall and then at him and said, the oldest one is from a year I was genuinely happy in this work. The most recent is from a year I was trying to look like I was. He did not know what to say to this, so he said, I know. Yes, she said. I can see that you do. The elevator arrived. I will contact you in 1 week, Midoriya-kun. I will be ready, he said. He rode down 12 floors in the empty elevator and stepped out into the afternoon city, and the thread, when it formed a week later almost to the hour, was golden in the particular way of things that have been waited for with patience and have not disappointed the waiting. Chapter 18, The Winter Tournament. The Interagency Winter Tournament was held in Yokohama, in an indoor training complex that had the scale and acoustics of a concert hall and the practical aesthetic of something designed by people who cared about function and had no opinions about ambience. Izuku arrived with his registration confirmed, his tournament bracket assigned, and a level of preparedness that was somewhat in excess of what a student entered under the guest category was expected to bring. He had been training specifically for this for 6 weeks, not because the tournament itself was the point but because what Nana Shimura had said was right. The excellence had to be real, or it would not register. Mirko was in the tournament as a senior participant, which meant she was there in a different bracket but sharing the general field, the training rooms, the common areas. Izuku did not seek her out. He had decided that seeking out was the wrong motion. The right motion was to be excellent in plain sight and let the noticing happen naturally. He won his first 3 matches cleanly. The 4th match was against a 3rd year from Ketsubutsu whose quirk had applications in spatial distortion that Izuku had not encountered before and which required 40 seconds of active problem solving in real time to develop a counter for. He won that match less cleanly but more interestingly, and he was aware, as he came off the floor, that several people had watched the 40 seconds of problem solving with the specific attention that the unusual always draws. Mirko was one of them. He did not look at her. He went to get water and reviewed the 5th round brackets and thought about his opponent's spatial anchor points and how they could be disrupted without requiring a direct confrontation. He felt her biological signature when she came into the water station area. 43%, running hot from recent exertion, cellular pattern still combative against its own depletion. He did not look up from the bracket sheet. Guest category, she said. Yes. UA. 2nd year. You solved the Ketsubutsu kid's anchor disruption in 40 seconds. 43, he said, because precision mattered. She was quiet for a moment. He could feel her looking at him with the particular quality of someone who is doing a rapid assessment and has not yet decided what to do with the results. What is your quirk? She asked. Biological. He finally looked up. I read and redirect vitality. That is not how you won the fourth match. No. The fourth match was won with a combination of misdirection and the application of approximately 6 months of proprioceptive training that I have been using to compensate for the fact that my quirk is not optimized for direct combat. She looked at him. Her expression was one that he had learned, over months of reading the hero community from the outside in, was her version of interest. It was not warm, exactly. It was the focused attention of someone who had just encountered a variable they had not modeled. You are the one Ryukyu has been talking about, she said. He had not known Ryukyu had been talking about him. He noted this for later. What did she say? She said there was a second year at UA who was doing something she could not fully describe, but that was the most significant thing she had seen in the hero community in a long time. She said she would not explain the specifics but that when the time came I would understand. Mirko looked at him with the directness that was, apparently, simply her native mode of interaction. I am not someone who waits for the time to come. I prefer to go find it. I know, he said. That is part of why you are here. She looked at him for a sharp moment. Explain that. I entered the tournament because I needed you to see me in a context where you could make your own assessment. The assessment needed to come before anything else, or the anything else would not have the foundation to stand on. You engineered this. I created a condition for a natural encounter. Whether that is engineering depends on how strictly you define the term. She stared at him for a moment. Then she said, you are either incredibly arrogant or incredibly careful. I have been told it is often both. Something shifted in her expression. Not softened. She did not appear to soften. But the quality of her attention changed, became something that was, in its way, the beginning of respect. The 5th round is in an hour, she said. Win it and then come find me. I want to hear the rest of whatever this is. She left before he could answer, which he recognized as a style of conversation, a way of making the next step his responsibility and ensuring he understood that it was. He won the 5th round in 11 minutes. He found her in the warm-down area afterward, stretching with the focused, systematic attention she brought to physical maintenance, and sat down near enough to talk and far enough to signal that he was not crowding her space. Talk, she said, without looking up from her stretch. He talked. He told her about the quirk, the full version. He told her about the threads. He told her the number, 43%. He watched her stillness when he said it, the stillness of someone hearing a thing confirmed that they have been knowing at a level beneath language for a long time. He told her about Midnight and Ryukyu and what they were building. He did not tell her about Nana Shimura. That would come later, when the foundation was in place. She asked 11 questions. Each one was specific, technically precise, and aimed at exactly the weakest point in whatever he had just said. He answered all of them honestly, including the 3 he did not have complete answers for, which he marked clearly as incomplete. At the end she was quiet for a long time, still moving through her stretching routine with automatic precision. If I do this, she said, it is on my terms. Not yours. Mine. Any agreement we make is one I drafted, not one I accepted. I would expect nothing else, he said. And the connection is mine to end if I decide I want it ended. Yes. I would not hold a thread in someone who wanted it closed. Can you actually do that? Close it? He had thought about this carefully. I have not tested it. I believe so. I would not tell you I could if I had not reasoned through the mechanism carefully. Reason through is not the same as tested. No. It is not. That is a fair distinction and I will not smooth it over. She looked at him properly for the first time since he had sat down. You do not flinch when you do not know something. I try not to. The things I do not know are usually the most important ones. She went back to her stretching. He waited. 3 days, she said. I want 3 days to think about this without contact. Then I will call you. 3 days, he agreed. She called in too. Chapter 19, 5 Threads. December arrived quietly, the way December comes to years that have been full enough that the end of them feels less like a conclusion and more like a pause. Izuku had 5 threads now. He had been paying careful attention to the transition from 4 to 5, monitoring his own experience with the same systematic rigor he applied to everything, looking for the threshold he had described to Nana Shimura months ago. The threshold had not presented as a wall or a warning. It had presented as an adjustment, a recalibration period of approximately 4 days during which the monitoring of all 5 required more active attention before settling into the background awareness that was the normal operating state. After 4 days it had settled. All 5 threads ran cleanly, carrying their specific qualities: Midnight's steady, slightly elevated baseline with the occasional pulse of creativity that came when she was developing something new for a class, Ryukyu's deep, organized signal with the regular peaks of physical exertion that her training schedule produced, Nana Shimura's wide current, still carrying the quality of active intelligence that he had felt from the first night, Uwabami's golden thread, now reading at 67% and continuing to climb, Mirko's combative pulse, still low at 46% but no longer declining, which was the first significant change in her biological trajectory in the time he had been monitoring it. 46 and stabilizing was not good enough, but it was different from 43 and sliding, and the difference mattered. Mirko's transfer had been conducted 3 days after her phone call, in a training facility near her agency that she had cleared of personnel with a thoroughness that told him she understood the stakes of privacy in ways she did not need to have explained. She had stood in the center of the cleared space with her arms at her sides and looked at him with an expression that he was learning was her version of trust, which looked nothing like what trust looked like on most people and was instead a kind of stripped down, absolute stillness that was in its own way more vulnerable than warmth. "Do it right," she had said. "I will do it right," he had said. He had done it right. The transfer for Mirko had been different from the others in a specific way that he had noted afterward. Her body had not simply accepted the vitality, it had mobilized it. Where the others had experienced the restoration as a return to baseline, Mirko's cellular structure had immediately begun redirecting the restored energy into her physical systems in a way that was almost aggressive in its efficiency, converting the transfer into active regeneration at a rate he had not observed before. He had checked his readings 3 times to confirm he was not misinterpreting. He was not misinterpreting. Mirko's physiology was simply exceptionally good at using what it was given. The implication was that her ceiling, once the restoration had completed its initial phase, would be higher than his original projections. Possibly significantly higher. He had written this up in Notebook 6 and shared it with the group at their next meeting. Nana Shimura had looked at the data and said, she was built for this. Not as a compliment. As an observation about the biological reality of a person who had been defined by physical excellence their entire life and whose body reflected that definition at the cellular level. All of you were built for it in different ways, Izuku had said. But she most visibly. Yes. The 5 of them had met twice in the December weeks. These meetings were different from the earlier ones, which had been primarily informational and strategic. They were becoming something else, something that had the quality of a group of people who are beginning to understand each other well enough to stop explaining and start thinking together. Mirko did not speak often in the group setting. When she spoke it was with the economy of someone who has decided that a point is worth making and makes it once, clearly, without hedging. Uwabami spoke with the careful precision of someone who was still learning the room, still taking accurate measure of each person in it, building the kind of understanding she would need before she was willing to commit fully. Nana Shimura anchored everything. This was, Izuku had come to think, her natural function in any group she was part of, the quiet gravitational center that other intelligences oriented around without being directed to. She did not command attention. She simply had it. On the last meeting before the winter holidays, she looked at the whiteboard and the 20 remaining names on the diagram and said, "We need a name." The room was quiet for a moment. "We keep putting this off," Midnight said. "We are not putting it off," Ryukyu said. "We are waiting until we know what we are well enough to name it accurately." "Do we know yet?" Uwabami asked. Izuku looked at the 5 threads, felt them as a chord rather than separate notes, and thought about what the chord was. "We are a society," he said slowly. "That is the accurate word. Not an organization, not an agency, not a structure with a formal mandate. A society. A group of people who have chosen to be bound to each other by something that is not institutional and that exists outside the official channels. A society of what? Mirko asked. He looked at the whiteboard diagram, at the names in the critical column and the names in the depleted column and the structural analysis beneath them all. A society of people who have been given what should have been given to them from the beginning, he said. And who have decided to do something about the fact that it was not. The room held this for a moment. That is still a description, Ryukyu said. I know. Nana Shimura looked at the whiteboard for a long time. Then she turned and looked at Izuku. The Evergreen Society, she said. The room was quiet. Things that do not age, she said. Things that stay vital regardless of season. It is not grand. It does not announce itself. It describes exactly what this is. Izuku said it quietly, to hear how it sat. The Evergreen Society. It sat well. It sat the way the right words sit, with the particular ease of something that has been true all along and has only now been named. He wrote it at the top of a fresh page in Notebook 6. Outside the satellite office windows, the December sky was clear and very cold, and the trees on the street below had kept, against the season, the last few leaves they had not yet released, holding them with the specific stubbornness of things that know they do not have to let go before they are ready. The Life Force Alchemist. Act 3, The Evergreen Society. Chapter 20, January. The new year arrived with the particular crispness of Japanese January, all clean angles and cold light, the kind of weather that makes the world feel recently organized. Izuku returned to UA after the winter break carrying 2 new notebooks, a revised framework document he had been refining over the holidays, and the 5 threads, which had traveled with him through the break the way they traveled everywhere, steady and specific and his. He had spent the break at home with his mother. This had been important in a way he had not fully anticipated. His mother was the person who knew him best in the ordinary way, in the accumulation of small consistent knowing that comes from years of shared daily life, and spending 10 days in her company had reminded him that the version of himself that existed in the satellite office and in the careful architecture of what he was building was not the whole of who he was. There was also the version who sat at the kitchen table eating his mother's cooking and who talked about things that had nothing to do with vitality reserves and structural imprint theory, and that version was necessary in a way that was easy to forget when the work was large. His mother had noticed he was carrying something. She had not asked what it was directly. She was not a person who asked questions she suspected her son was not ready to answer. Instead she had, over the course of 10 days, created the conditions in which he could say something if he chose to. The conditions took the form of unhurried evenings and meals at the small kitchen table and occasional comments that opened space without requiring him to walk into it. On the 9th day he had told her some of it. Not the full scope. Not Nana Shimura, not the threads in their complete meaning, not the name of what they were building. But the core of it, that he had found, in his quirk, a way to help people who had been paying a cost the system did not see, and that he was building something around that capacity with people who had agreed to it with full knowledge, and that it was the most significant thing he had ever done and he was not certain it was going to stay manageable. His mother had listened to this the way she listened to everything important, with her whole self, and at the end she had been quiet for a moment and then she had said, "Is it good?" He had thought about it. Then he had said, "Yes. I believe it is." She had nodded, and reached across the table and put her hand over his, and the conversation had moved to other things, and when he left on the final morning she had hugged him for a long time and not said anything else about it, and he had taken that not saying as both trust and permission to continue. He arrived at UA on a Wednesday and by Thursday afternoon was in the satellite office. Nana Shimura had spent the break in what she described, with measured brevity, as orientation. She had procured appropriate documentation through channels that Ryukyu had arranged and which Izuku had chosen not to examine too closely, on the grounds that Ryukyu was a ranking hero who understood what was legally permissible and what was pragmatically necessary, and that the distinction between those two categories was not always a clean line. She had a residence, a small apartment in the same building as the satellite office, which Ryukyu owned under a corporate structure and which had been quietly prepared while Izuku was on holiday. She had also, in the week since the break began, read everything she could find about the current state of Hero Society. Everything, in her case, meant a very great deal. She had the reading speed and the retention of someone who had spent a career making decisions that required comprehensive information, and the 3 weeks had given her enough to work with. When she arrived at the satellite office on Thursday, she came with a folder that contained what she called an updated assessment and which was, in practice, the most thorough analysis of the current structural problems in the hero ecosystem that any of them had produced. It ran to 40 pages. Izuku read it in 2 hours with his pencil moving. When he finished, he looked up at her and said, "This is remarkable." "It is accurate," she said. "Whether it is remarkable depends on the comparison class. Compared to anything I have produced. You have been doing this for 2 years from the outside. I have been doing this for 30 from the inside." She said this without dismissiveness. It was simply a description of relative positioning. The structural failures I am identifying are not new. They are the same failures that existed when I was active. What is new is the scale of them, the degree to which they have compounded without correction. What is the most urgent? Retention, she said immediately. The system is losing its most experienced women at an accelerating rate and replacing them with excellent but inexperienced heroes who then go through the same depletion cycle without the benefit of the institutional knowledge the departing generation carried. The knowledge dies with the career. Or before the career ends, which is worse. A hero in the final years of a depleted career is not transmitting knowledge effectively. She is managing her own depletion. He added this to the framework document. It fit precisely with what he had been modeling about the downstream effects of the vitality deficit, and having it named in Nana Shimura's terms gave it a weight it had not had when he was working from numbers alone. The others arrived over the following hour. By the time all 5 of them were seated, the satellite office had the density of purpose that had been building in it since November, and the new year had, without ceremony, begun. Chapter 21, What Recovery Girl Knew. Recovery Girl found him on a Tuesday. He was in the biology lab, where he spent 2 lunch periods a week on work that he logged as independent research and which was, in fact, a combination of legitimate independent research and work that was not quite independent and could not have been accurately logged as anything he was willing to put in writing. The door was open, because the work he was doing that particular Tuesday was the legitimate kind, a detailed analysis of the cellular regeneration rates in the treated animal subjects that he had been tracking for 18 months. She came in, put her cane against the work table, and sat down on the stool he kept near the bench for visitors who stayed long enough to need a seat. He waited. "Midoriya-kun," she said, in the voice she used when she was choosing her words with precision. "I want to have a conversation that we have both been not having for approximately 8 months. He set down his pencil. "I gave you access to the Hero archives," she said, "because you asked for it with a research justification that was technically accurate and substantively incomplete. I gave you the access because I wanted to see what you did with it, which I recognize as a somewhat unorthodox pedagogical approach." She paused. "I have been observing what you did with it." The room was very quiet. "Kayama has changed," she said. "I notice these things. It is the nature of my work. Her vitality markers, which I have been monitoring informally for 3 years as part of my general concern about faculty health, have shifted in a direction and at a rate that is consistent with exactly one explanation, which is an external biological intervention of a kind that should not exist. And yet it does," he said carefully. "And yet it does." She looked at him with the dry, complete attention of someone who has been in the medical profession for longer than most heroes have been alive. "I am not here to report you, Midoriya-kun. If I were going to report this, I would have done so in November. I am here because I am old enough to know that when something extraordinary is happening quietly, the worst possible outcome is for it to be handled by people who do not understand it. And the second worst? For it to be handled only by the person doing it, without anyone who can ask the questions he is not asking himself." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about what he knew of Shizenji Chiyo, the decades of work, the particular weariness of someone who had watched generation after generation of heroes come through her office and had seen, as clearly as he had, the cost the system extracted and the way it pretended not to. "I have not asked you yet," he said slowly. "Whether you want to be part of it." "You have not," she agreed. "I did not think you would want the transfer. I am 81 years old and I have been running this school's medical facility for 40 of them," she said. Whether I want the transfer is a question that requires considerably more conversation than we have had. But whether I want to be part of what you are building is a different question, and the answer to that one is yes. He was quiet for a moment. You are not in the diagram. What diagram? The one on the whiteboard at the satellite office. The top-ranked female heroes by reserve level. You are not a hero in that category. You are something different. I am the person who has been treating heroes for 40 years and who knows the inside of this problem better than anyone on your whiteboard, she said. And I am the person who can provide medical cover for what you are doing, which at some point you are going to need badly, because what you are doing cannot exist indefinitely without someone who can frame the outcomes in terms the broader medical community can process without alarm. He had not thought about this. He added it immediately to the framework document in his mind and felt it lock into place with the satisfying click of something that had been missing. Come to the satellite office, he said. Thursday evening. I want you to meet the others. I will be there, she said. She retrieved her cane and stood. At the door she paused. The access card I gave you. The archive. Yes? You found what you were looking for. It was not a question. Yes, he said. She nodded once, the nod of someone who has confirmed a hypothesis they were already quite certain of, and left him with his cellular regeneration data and the very clear sense that the shape of what he was building had just acquired a structural element he had not known to plan for and which was, now that it was present, obviously essential. Chapter 22, The Medical Cover. Thursday evening, 7 members around the satellite office table. Recovery Girl had brought a folder of her own, which she placed on the table without comment and which, when opened, turned out to contain a longitudinal medical analysis of the 12 heroes she had treated most consistently over the past decade, with comparative markers for vitality decline rates, injury recovery trajectories, and what she called the performance persistence gap, by which she meant the distance between a hero's actual functional capacity and the capacity they were presenting to the commission and the public. The silence when the group read through it was the particular silence of people who already suspected something and have just been handed the documentation. You have been tracking this for years, Nana Shimura said. I have been tracking it since before most of you were born, Recovery Girl said, without particular emphasis. I did not have a mechanism to do anything about it. I had data and I had concern and I had the institutional constraint of a medical professional who is employed by an organization that does not wish to hear that its operational model is destroying the people who execute it. And now? And now I am sitting in a room with someone who has a mechanism, and 6 other people who have decided to use it. Mirko, who had been quiet since she arrived, looked at Recovery Girl with the focused attention she brought to people she was deciding how to categorize. You knew about this before he brought you in. I suspected, Recovery Girl said. I confirmed. And you are not concerned about the implications of what he is doing. I am deeply concerned about the implications, Recovery Girl said. I have been deeply concerned for 8 months. Concern and opposition are not the same thing. I have examined what he is doing, and the process is ethical and the outcomes are beneficial and the method of consent is more rigorous than the majority of medical procedures I perform under institutional sanction. She looked at Mirko steadily. What I am concerned about is sustainability. What I am concerned about is the moment this becomes known to the Commission, and my concern is not that it will be stopped but that it will be taken and reshaped into something that serves the Commission's interests rather than the interests of the women receiving it. That is my concern too, Izuku said. I know it is. Which is why you need me, because when that moment comes, you need someone in the room who speaks the language those people respond to, which is medical documentation and institutional credibility and 40 years of being impossible to dismiss. The room absorbed this. Uwabami, who had been making notes in the small leather notebook she always brought to meetings, looked up. What would the documentation strategy look like? Longitudinal. Careful. Framed in terms that are accurate but that present the mechanism at a level of abstraction that gives us time before the specifics become a legislative question. Recovery Girl turned a page in her folder. I have been thinking about a research framework. An independent study on quirk-mediated biological enhancement with a focus on long-term outcomes. Filed under the UA research umbrella. Peer-reviewed. Not secret, but not detailed. It creates a paper trail that makes what is happening here look like authorized scientific inquiry rather than a clandestine operation. Which is what it is, Midnight said. Which is what it currently is, Recovery Girl said. The distinction matters when the commission asks questions. Authorized scientific inquiry under university research protocols is a very different conversation than what they would otherwise see. Nana Shimura had been listening with the particular quality of attention she brought to operational planning, the attention of someone running scenarios. How long does the documentation strategy buy us? 2 years if we are disciplined. 3 if the commission is occupied with other priorities, which given the current threat landscape is not unlikely. And after 3 years? After 3 years we have a body of evidence and a group of beneficiaries with the standing to advocate for what this is on its own terms, Recovery Girl said. Which is considerably better leverage than we have today. Izuku looked at the whiteboard. The diagram was still there from the previous meeting, slightly updated, the critical column names now crossed in a way that indicated they had been addressed. There were still 17 names remaining. 17 names, and a timeline, and now a medical cover strategy, and the shape of the thing was acquiring structure he had not known to build for and was grateful to have. I want to address 2 more names this quarter, he said. Before the timeline pressure begins. Who? Nana Shimura asked. He looked at the diagram. There were 2 names he had been watching the longest, 2 heroes whose reserves had been in his notebook since before midnight, since the very beginning of the observation project, and who had been declining steadily through all the months he had been building toward this moment. He named them. The room was quiet for a moment with the particular quality of people who recognize significance when they hear it. Then Midnight said, those 2 will change the weight of this considerably. Yes, he said. That is why I have been waiting until we had the structure to hold the weight. Chapter 23, MT Lady. Yutakiyama was not easy to approach, and she was not easy to approach for reasons that were specific to her and that he had spent considerable time trying to understand accurately rather than superficially. The superficial version was that she was famous, accessible only through agencies and public relations structures, and that the energy she presented to the world was bright and confident and seamlessly public in a way that left very little visible gap for a different kind of conversation. The accurate version was more interesting. He had been reading her from observation points and photographs for nearly as long as he had been reading anyone, and what his readings showed was a person whose public presentation and biological reality were further apart than almost anyone else on the diagram. Her reserve was 57%. Her cellular age markers were consistent with someone a decade older. But none of this was legible in any footage, any interview, any public appearance. She was, in the language of his notebooks, a perfect compensation, a person who had gotten so good at presenting strength that the performance had become indistinguishable from the reality in every context except the one his quirk provided. This was not dishonesty. He had been thinking carefully about what to call it and had concluded it was not dishonesty. It was survival strategy elevated to art form. It was someone who had understood, early in her career, that the gap between what she was and what the public needed her to be was a gap she would be punished for if she let anyone see it, and who had therefore decided not to let anyone see it. The question of how to approach someone who had spent years building that specific kind of armor was the question he had been sitting with since November. Nana Shimura's answer, when he brought it to the group, was not what he expected. Do not approach the armor, she said. The armor is built to deflect approaches. Find the thing she built it to protect. Which is? The actual work. Not the fame. Not the brand. The heroism. She is not someone who does this for the attention, whatever the public image suggests. She is someone who does this because it matters to her and who has been paying the cost of doing it in a society that looks at women and sees the surface first and the substance second. Nana Shimura paused. Find her at work. Not a public event. Not a press opportunity. An actual operation. Show her you understand the substance and she will understand that you are not there for the surface. Izuku had thought about this for a week. Then he had done something he had not done before. He had asked Ryukyu to request a joint training exercise. Not a romantic overture. Not a casual encounter. A legitimate professional request, agency to agency, second-year student to senior hero, framed as a training opportunity in large-scale scenario management. Ryukyu had submitted the request through proper channels. MT Ladies Agency had processed it and assigned a date in late January. The exercise was at a disaster response training facility in Saitama, a full-scale mock urban environment with collapsible structures and simulated debris fields that was used by agencies for large-scale coordination drills. MT Lady used it regularly. He had looked up her training schedule through public records. He arrived early and set up in the scenario control area with the scenario documentation and his own prepared materials. When she came in, he was already at work, which meant the first thing she saw was not someone who had come to see her but someone who was there for the same reason she was. She looked at him for a moment, registered him as a second-year student with a professional setup, and said, "Ryukyu sent you." She recommended the opportunity, he said. "I requested it." "Why?" "Large-scale scenario management with a hero whose quirk requires precise urban navigation has specific instructional value for the kind of analytical work I do. I have been studying your public operation records for 14 months and I wanted to see the real version." She looked at him with the careful attention of someone who has received a great deal of flattery and has become expert at detecting the difference between flattery and accurate technical observation. What he had said was accurate technical observation, and she knew the difference. "What have you found in the public records?" she asked. He told her. He gave her a 4-minute summary of the analytical work he had done on her operational patterns, including 2 observations that were, he was fairly confident, things she had not seen articulated in exactly those terms before. He watched the careful attention shift into something more engaged. "You have been doing this for 14 months?" she said. "I track all significant operational heroes. You are in a specific category that I find particularly instructive." "What category?" "Heroes whose quirk requires managing structural scale in urban environments with high collateral risk," he said. "The decision-making under those parameters is different from any other operational context and I have not found adequate academic treatment of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right. Show me what you have." They worked through the morning. She was, in person, different from the public version in the way he had expected, more focused, more technically specific, with less of the bright energy that served the cameras and more of the concentrated attention that served the actual work. She did not perform anything in the training facility. She simply did the work, and watching her do it confirmed what his analysis had been suggesting for a year, which was that Yutakiyama at operational capacity was a considerably more sophisticated professional than the public narrative about her accounted for. In the afternoon break, at the water station that was becoming, he noted, a recurring venue for significant conversations, she looked at him and said, "You are not here just for the training data." "No," he said. "What else?" he told her. He had learned by now that the direct approach worked better than the gradual one, and that people who were good at reading subtlety tended to prefer being told the actual thing rather than discovering it was being worked toward. He told her his quirk's full capacity. He told her the number. He watched the number land. 57, she said. "Yes. Down from 62 18 months ago." The bright public energy was entirely absent now. What was in its place was something simpler and more substantial, the expression of a person who has been managing a fact and has just been seen managing it by someone who is not going to make it a liability. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. He told her about the group. Not the full details of Nana Shimura, not yet, but the existence of the others and what they had agreed to. She was quiet for a long time. "I have been telling myself it was manageable," she said. Not with desperation. With the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of someone putting down a thing they have been carrying in a way that has been hurting their hand. "It has been manageable," he said. "The question is for how much longer and at what cost. And you are saying it does not have to cost anything more." "I am saying the cost that has already been paid is acknowledged, and the cost going forward is mine to bear, if you are willing." She looked at him for a long time. The training facility was quiet in the afternoon break, echoing faintly with the distant sounds of other teams running their own drills. "I want to meet the others," she said. "I was planning to offer that. Before I decide." "Of course." She nodded. The bright energy came back, but it sat differently now, layered over something that had been visible for an afternoon and had, in being seen, lost a small but meaningful portion of its weight. "Tomorrow evening?" she said. I will arrange it. Chapter 24, The Room Receives Her. MT Lady arrived at the satellite office the following evening in civilian clothes that were carefully chosen to be unremarkable, which was its own kind of statement from someone whose public presence was defined by being the opposite of unremarkable. Izuku let her in. She took 3 steps into the room and stopped. The satellite office at this point was not what it had been in October. The whiteboard held the current diagram and 3 analytical frameworks. The proper table held notebooks and folders and the electric kettle that had become a permanent fixture. The 5 chairs were arranged in the configuration that had evolved organically over the months of meetings, not a formal arrangement but a working one, the chairs positioned for the way actual conversation moved rather than for visual impression. And the people in it. Recovery girl on the near side, small and composed and radiating the particular authority of extreme professional experience. Midnight, who MT Lady knew from the broader hero circuit, sitting with the relaxed attention of someone who has been in this room enough times to be at home in it. Ryukyu, whom MT Lady also knew, but differently here, the public composure replaced by something more direct and more present. Mirko, in the chair near the window, arms folded, watching the newcomer with the assessing attention she brought to everyone until she had formed her view. Iwabumi, neat and careful, notebook open. And Nana Shimura. MT Lady looked at Nana Shimura for a long moment. She did not say anything immediately. She was, he could see, doing the work of identification, running the face against records that everyone in the hero community carried in some form, and arriving at the conclusion that was, by its nature, not credible and was also clearly correct. You are, she said, and stopped. Yes, Nana Shimura said. That is not possible. And yet here we are, Midnight said, with the dry warmth she had developed for exactly this exchange, which had happened in some form with both Mirko and Iwabumi and had proven to be the single most reliable test of a newcomer's capacity for the extraordinary. MT Lady looked at Izuku. This is what I told you was not fully explainable in advance, he said. I did not want to describe it and have it be disbelieved before you had seen it. That was, she said carefully, a significant thing to hold back. Yes. I am sorry for that. It was a judgment call and I believe it was the right one, but I understand if you disagree. She stood in the middle of the room for another moment, recalibrating. He could see her doing it, could see the way her mind moved through the fact and organized it, and he found himself respecting the speed with which she moved from shock to function. Sit down, she said, to no one in particular, and then sat down herself, which made the instruction apply to her and not to the room and which, in its way, was exactly the kind of self-directed command that suggested someone was taking themselves in hand. Izuku sat. The others had not stood. Tell me everything, she said. From the start. I want the version with everything in it. Nana Shimura spoke first, which was unusual. She described herself, who she had been, what had happened, what the restoration had involved, what she had experienced in the first hours and the weeks since. She spoke with the directness and precision that Izuku had come to recognize as her native register, and the effect of hearing the impossible described in that tone was to make it feel not impossible but simply unusual, a fact among facts, requiring adjustment rather than disbelief. Then Izuku spoke. The mechanics. The threads. The framework. The group. Then, one by one, each of the others added their own account, when they had been approached, what they had been told, what the transfer had felt like, what had changed. They had done this before, he realized, developed an informal rotation for bringing someone into the room, each person speaking to their own part of it so that the newcomer received not a single narrative but a chorus of them, all consistent, all specific, all carrying the particular conviction of things that had been lived rather than constructed. MT Lady listened for an hour and a half without speaking. At the end she said, "What are the terms?" He told her the terms. She listened to them with the attention of someone who had been on the receiving end of enough professional agreements to know what a good faith offer looked like and what a manipulative one looked like, and when he finished she sat with it for a long moment. The monitoring, she said. The thread. You will be able to feel my biological state. Yes. At all times. At all times. I do not look unless the signal suggests something requires attention. But you could look. Yes. I want to be honest about that. She looked at Mirko, who had been through exactly this conversation and whose expression gave nothing away. Does it feel intrusive? No, Mirko said. It feels like knowing someone is there. A pause, which was significant from Mirko, who did not pause casually. It is not a bad feeling. MT Lady looked at Iwabumi, who said, it took me approximately 3 weeks to stop noticing it. Now I only notice it if I specifically attend to it. She looked at Midnight, who said, I was the first. I have had it the longest. It has never felt like anything other than what it is. And what is it? MT Lady asked. Someone who cares about whether you are well and who has the capacity to do something about it when you are not, Midnight said, simply. MT Lady was quiet for a long time. Then she said, do it. The transfer for MT Lady had a quality he had not quite encountered before. It was, he thought afterward, something in the particular combination of the extensive professional performance layer and the real person beneath it, the way the cellular structure responded to the restoration was something that felt, at the biological level, like relief. Not the aggressive mobilization of Mirko's physiology. Not the steady consolidation of Midnight's. Something closer to the particular quality of tension releasing, of a body that had been braced for a long time and was only now discovering it did not have to stay braced. The thread settled clean and specific, with its own individual quality the way all the threads had their own quality. He stepped back. MT Lady opened her eyes and looked at her hands. Then she looked at the room. Oh, she said softly. It was not a dramatic response. It was the smallest possible version of what she could have said. And it carried, in that smallness, everything she did not say. Chapter 25, The Second Name. The second name he had written in the critical column that December evening was 13. Oboro Shiozaki, the space hero 13, was not a combat-focused hero in the way of Mirko or MT Lady. She was a rescue specialist, the best in Japan in the current ranking, and the particular demands of rescue heroics were different from combat heroics in ways that the public did not fully understand and that the Commission did not adequately account for. Combat heroes sustained peak physical cost during visible, documented events. The cost was legible. It registered in the operational record. Recovery time was built into the schedule because the alternative was the hero failing publicly and expensively. Rescue heroes sustained cost over extended periods in situations of extreme psychological pressure, with less visible physical damage and more visible psychological depletion. The cost was not legible in the same way. It was easy to look at a rescue hero who had not been physically injured and conclude that she was fine, without seeing that the accumulated weight of what she carried from every operation she had conducted had been compounding in her cellular structure for years without interruption. 13's reserve was 44%. Her cellular age markers showed extreme depletion in the neurological systems, the ones that governed stress response and emotional regulation, while her physical systems were relatively preserved. She was, in the clinical terms of his notebook, experiencing a specific kind of depletion that his other cases had not shown to the same degree, and which required a modified approach to the transfer. He had been developing the modification for 3 weeks before he approached her. He went through Recovery Girl, who knew 13 professionally and who made the introduction as a medical consultation on occupational health, which was accurate in every relevant sense. The meeting was in Recovery Girl's annex at UA on a Saturday morning. 13 came in civilian dress, which for her meant the kind of careful anonymity that rescue heroes tended to prefer when they were not on duty, the deliberate absence of the visual markers that made them recognizable. She was shorter than he had expected. She had the eyes of someone who had seen a great many emergency situations and who had learned to metabolize the memory of them, imperfectly and over time, which was the only way anyone learned to do it. Recovery Girl introduced him and then stayed in the room, which he had asked for in advance and which 13 had been told about and had agreed to. Having Recovery Girl present served 2 purposes. It grounded the conversation in the medical framework that provided context, and it gave 13 a known professional to orient to if the conversation became difficult. He told her everything in the order and the way he had learned worked best. He told her the full scope of the quirk first, because he had found that starting with the scope oriented people correctly for everything that followed. He told her the number, 44%, with the specific neurological depletion pattern. She received the 44 with the stillness of someone who already knew the number was bad and was simply now learning exactly how bad. The depletion pattern, he said, is different from the other cases I have addressed. It is concentrated in the neurological and stress response systems. The standard transfer would address the physical baseline but might not fully reach the neurological deficit without a modified approach. What is the modified approach? More targeted. I would need to direct the transfer to the specific systems rather than allowing it to distribute evenly, which requires more precision but should produce better outcomes for your specific pattern. Have you done this before? Not in exactly this form. I have been developing the modification for the past 3 weeks. I have worked through the mechanics carefully, but I want to be transparent that it is an adaptation rather than a tested procedure. She looked at him for a long moment. He noticed that she had Recovery Girl's folder in her hands and had been reading it while he spoke, which meant she was processing both the oral and the written information simultaneously, which told him something about how she worked. You built something new for my case specifically, she said. Yes. Why? He considered the question. He had a clinical answer and a true answer, and they were not the same. Because the standard approach would have been sufficient as a partial improvement and insufficient as a full one, he said, and I do not want to do this partially. I want to do it completely or know precisely why it cannot be done completely. She set the folder down. You are going to be a very difficult hero to work with, she said, and the tone of it made clear this was a compliment. I have been told something like that before, he said. Recovery Girl made a quiet sound that was her version of agreement. 13 looked at the window. Outside the annex the campus was quiet, the January cold keeping everyone indoors. I have been managing, she said. Not defensively. With the particular honesty of someone who is accustomed to managing and knows exactly what the managing costs and has simply been doing it because the alternative has not previously existed. I know you have been, he said. The neurological piece. The stress response depletion. It makes the work harder to carry. Not the work itself. The after. Yes. That is precisely the component the modification is designed to address. She was quiet for a long moment. Will it affect how I do the job? Your capacity will be higher. Your recovery time will be shorter. The after should be lighter. He paused. Whether it changes the work itself is a question I cannot fully answer, because I do not know what the work feels like from the inside once the depletion is no longer compounding it. That is an honest answer. I try to only give those. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, tell me about the others. The group. What are they like? He told her about each of them in turn, not the data, the people. He told her about Midnight's dry warmth and the way she had become the most consistent interpreter of the room's internal dynamics. He told her about Ryukyu's operational precision and the way she asked the question that organized every conversation she was part of. He told her about Mirko's economy of word and the particular quality of her trust once it was given. He told her about Uwabami's careful attentiveness and the way she had become the group's most thorough institutional memory. He told her about MT Lady and the specific kind of courage required to put down armor you have been carrying for a long time. He told her about Recovery Girl's 40 years. And then he told her about Nana Shimura. This, he had learned over several conversations, was always the moment. The moment when the person across from him had to decide whether the extraordinary was something they could hold without it destabilizing everything else. He had gotten better at delivering it, matter of fact, specific, with enough detail to make it credible and enough respect for the weight of it to allow time for the adjustment. 13 was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, I want to meet her before I decide anything. Of course. And I want to do this in the right order. The meeting first. The decision after. I do not respond well to being hurried. No one here has been hurried, he said. That is not how this works. She looked at him with an expression that was beginning to coalesce into something he was coming to recognize as trust, the specific trust of a person who takes it seriously and gives it carefully and has been watching for the thing that would make it warranted. Saturday, she said. The satellite office. Saturday, he agreed. Chapter 26, 8. 13 received her transfer on a Sunday morning in early February, in Recovery Girl's Annex, with Recovery Girl present and the modified approach delivered precisely as he had designed it. The modification worked. He had not allowed himself to assume it would, had held the possibility of partial success or the need for a second session carefully in mind throughout the preparation, because the neurological systems were the most delicate target he had worked with and the most consequential to get wrong. But the modification worked cleanly, the targeted transfer reaching the depleted stress response systems with a precision that surprised even him, and he felt the neurological cellular patterns shift and reorient in ways that his standard transfers had not produced. The thread to 13 was the quietest of the 8. Not weak, quiet. It carried information with a precision that reminded him of a very fine instrument, one that was less about volume than about the accuracy of the signal. 8 threads. He sat with that number for a day before he let himself think about what it meant. 8 threads meant 8 women who had agreed to what he was building on terms they had helped establish. 8 threads meant 8 biological histories that he could read at any moment, 8 people whose well-being was part of his ongoing awareness in the background way that the threads had settled into. 8 threads meant that the Evergreen Society, which had been a name on a whiteboard 3 months ago, was now a fact in the world, a real thing with members and history and the particular weight of something that has grown beyond the moment of its conception. He wrote about this in Notebook 6 on the day after 13's transfer, sitting alone in the satellite office in the morning before anyone else arrived. He wrote about it the way he wrote about things that required him to think while writing, not to record conclusions he had already reached but to find them. What he found, over the course of 6 pages, was this: the threads were not simply informational. They were relational. Each one carried not only biological data but the specific quality of a person, the signature of an individual whose way of being in the world had its own texture that he could now feel as clearly as he felt the vitality reserve or the cellular age markers. He knew the quality of Midnight's attention. He knew the particular steadiness of Ryukyu's operational focus. He knew the wide, intelligent current of Nana Shimura. He knew Mirko's combative precision. He knew Iwabumi's careful, accumulating care. He knew MT Lady's layered brightness. He knew Recovery Girl's vast, dry competence. He knew 13's quiet exactitude. He knew them, in a way that did not have a name in the frameworks he had been using, in a way that was biological and also more than biological, in a way that had to do with what it meant to be genuinely responsible for another person's well-being. He sat with this for a long time. Then he wrote, "I did not know it was going to feel like this." And then, on the line below, "I think it should." He closed the notebook and made tea and waited for the morning to bring the others in, because the morning always did, and the room that had been impersonal and provisional in October was now, unmistakably, the room that held the center of the most important thing he had ever been part of. Midnight arrived first, as she often did. She came in, poured her own tea without asking, and sat down across from him. "You look like you have been thinking hard," she said. "Since 5:30. Anything to report?" He considered this. "I think I understand what this is now," he said. "Not just what it does. What it is." She waited. "It is care," he said. "Real care, with the specific weight of something chosen. Not assigned, not obligated, not performed. Chosen, every day, by everyone in the room." He paused. "That is what the threads are. That is what they carry. I have been reading biological data in them and the biological data is real but it is not the whole of what I am reading." Midnight was quiet for a moment, holding her tea with both hands. "Welcome to the part," she said eventually, "that the notebooks could not have told you." He nodded. Outside the satellite office windows the February morning was bright and very cold, and the 6 remaining names on the whiteboard diagram waited with the patient stillness of things that have not yet been reached but that will be. Chapter 27, The Commission Notices. In March, the Hero Commission noticed. He had expected this. Recovery Girl's documentation strategy had given them a longer runway than he had initially projected, and the university research framework had successfully absorbed the inquiry that had come in January from a commission health officer who had flagged anomalous vitality markers in 3 heroes during routine assessment. The research framework had provided a credible context, authorized study, university oversight, ongoing documentation, preliminary results pending peer review. The commission health officer had noted the flag and moved on. March's attention was different. March's attention came from a different office, the Hero Deployment and Capacity Division, which tracked operational readiness across ranked heroes and which had, in its February report, noted an unusual pattern of improved performance metrics among a cluster of heroes who had no recent training modifications, no injury recovery periods, and no other evident variable to account for the improvement. The cluster included Ryukyu, Mirko, and MT Lady. All three had been performing at levels that their baselines from 6 months prior could not easily explain. He learned about this from Ryukyu on a Thursday evening, 3 days after she had received the informal inquiry. She had been asked to provide context for her performance improvement as part of a routine follow-up. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "I told them I had made modifications to my training and recovery protocol under the guidance of a university research project." She said this with the composed steadiness of someone who has thought about how to say exactly this for some time. "Which is true. The modifications I made were to attend the sessions Recovery Girl recommended under the research framework. Every statement I made was accurate. What will they do next?" "Request documentation from the research project," Recovery Girl said. She was in the room, as she increasingly was for Thursday meetings, having become as much a fixture of the satellite office as the whiteboard and the electric kettle. "Which I am prepared to provide. The documentation exists. It is thorough and peer-reviewed and describes what is happening at the level of abstraction we discussed. Will it satisfy them?" "For now." The Commission responds to documentation the way most bureaucracies respond to documentation, which is to say they process it, note that it exists, and continue unless something in it provides cause for specific concern. She paused. "The specific concern we are managing is the mechanism. As long as the documentation describes outcomes without specifying mechanism in terms that trigger the Commission's enhanced oversight protocols, we have runway." "How much runway?" "1 inquiry per quarter, handled correctly, gives us a year. 2 inquiries in the same quarter would require a different response." Nana Shimura, who had been listening with the particular quality of attention she brought to operational planning, spoke. "This is the point at which we should think about who we want in the room when the Commission conversation eventually happens." "We have been thinking about that," Midnight said. "Thinking is not deciding." Nana Shimura looked at each of them in turn. "The Commission will eventually want to speak to someone with authority." "Who speaks for this group?" The room was quiet for a moment. "Izuku does," Ryukyu said. "He is a student," Nana Shimura said. "The Commission does not give authority to students." "Then we need someone with standing," Mirko said. She rarely spoke at strategic planning sessions, preferring operational discussions, and when she did speak the room attended to it carefully. "Standing that the Commission respects. Not institutional standing. Personal standing. The kind that comes from a record of doing the work correctly for a long time." The room looked at Nana Shimura. She received the looking with equanimity. "I am not a named figure in the current Commission's institutional memory," she said. "I am a historical record." "You are a historical record that is sitting in this room," Midnight said. "The moment the Commission sees you, the historical becomes current. And a hero of your standing who has, for reasons that cannot be dismissed, returned to active status and is advocating for this is a different conversation than anything else we could bring. It is also the conversation that answers every other question they will have," Iwabumi said quietly. She had been making notes throughout and now looked up. "The moment the Commission sees you, the mechanism has a face and a history that places it in a context they cannot dismiss. It is the strongest possible position from which to have that conversation." Nana Shimura was quiet for a long time. "Not yet," she said finally. "Not until we have the documentation complete and the full group in a position to speak with a unified voice. But I agree that when the time comes, I should be the one to open the door." "When is the time?" Izuku asked. She looked at the whiteboard. 6 names in the remaining column. "When those 6 are no longer in the remaining column," she said. 6 names. He looked at them. 6 months, he said. "If the approach holds. Then we have 6 months to prepare the conversation we want to have," Nana Shimura said. "Let us not waste them." Chapter 28, Spring. Spring came to the satellite office the way spring came everywhere in Japan, with the specific, reliable beauty of cherry blossoms that managed to be both expected and astonishing, the annual proof that the world could produce something exquisite on a schedule. The group had expanded to 11 by April. He would not record all the names in the notebooks, not the full details of each approach and each conversation and each thread's specific quality, though he had done so in the notebooks themselves, because the notebooks were the proper place for it. What mattered in the broader account was the cumulative fact: 11 women who had agreed to what the Evergreen Society was on terms they had helped shape, 11 threads running in the background of his awareness with their 11 specific qualities, 11 people who had been running at deficits and who were no longer. The commission had sent 2 more inquiries, both handled by Recovery Girl's documentation framework with the calm efficiency of a system that had been designed for exactly this. Yagi-sensei had become a quiet presence at occasional meetings, not a member in the formal sense but a witness, someone who understood the full history and whose presence in the room carried the weight of that understanding. He said little. He listened with the particular attention of someone who has paid a very high personal cost for the things this group was working to address, and who therefore hears the work with a register that no one else in the room can quite access. Nana Shimura and Yagi-sensei had met privately 7 times over the winter and spring. What those meetings contained was not something Izuku inquired about. The thread told him, on the evenings of those meetings, that she carried the quality of someone who has been doing necessary and difficult and important emotional work, and that the quality afterward was always lighter than before. That was enough. His own life at UA had continued with the parallel structure it had maintained since October: the hero course, the classmates, the training that was genuinely demanding and which he had not allowed himself to deprioritize despite everything else. Bakugo had noticed he was different. Not in the way that Todoroki had noticed, with quiet patience, but in the way Bakugo noticed everything, which was with aggressive intensity and the specific frustration of someone who cannot figure out why they are losing ground in a comparison they have been conducting for years. "You are better," Bakugo had said to him, in the direct way of someone delivering an unpleasant fact. "And it is not from training. I have been training consistently," Izuku had said. "Not the kind I can see." Bakugo had looked at him with the full force of his intelligence, which was formidable and which he did not often use in a direction that was not antagonistic. "Something changed in November. Something is different. I do not know what it is and that bothers me." Izuku had looked at him for a moment. "I am doing good work," he had said. "Important work. That is all I can tell you right now." Bakugo had been quiet, which was its own kind of answer. On a Saturday morning in April, he sat in the satellite office with Nana Shimura before the others arrived, the way they sometimes did, the 2 of them in the quiet room with tea and the whiteboard and the morning light. "For names," she said, looking at the diagram. 2 had been added to the crossed column since March. 4, he agreed. "And the commission inquiry timing. Recovery Girl expects the next one in July. The March inquiry is processed and filed." She nodded. She was looking at the diagram but her attention was, he thought, on something behind it. "Tell me something," she said. "Yes? When you built this, when you decided this was what your quirk was for, what did you think it was going to cost you?" He considered the question. He had not been asked it directly before. "I thought it was going to cost time and energy and the ongoing responsibility of maintaining the threads," he said. "I thought it was going to cost the security of operating without the commission knowing what I was doing. I thought it was going to cost, eventually, a confrontation with institutional power that I was not going to be able to avoid. And personally?" He was quiet for a moment. "I did not think very carefully about the personal cost," he said honestly. "I think I assumed that the right thing done correctly would not have a personal cost that I could not manage. And now?" He looked at the 11 threads, the steady hum of them, the specific qualities of 11 people he now knew at a level of intimacy he had not planned for and could not have imagined from the outside. "Now I think the personal cost is that I love these people," he said. "Not romantically. Not the way the word gets simplified. I mean the full version of it, the version that carries responsibility and attention and genuine investment in their well-being. And I did not plan for the weight of that, because the weight is not what I thought it would be." He paused. "It is heavier than I expected and also more worth carrying than I expected, and I am still adjusting to the fact that both things are true simultaneously." Nana Shimura looked at him for a long moment. That, she said, is precisely the right answer. He looked at her. Was it a test? Everything is a test, when you are responsible for people who trust you. She turned back to the whiteboard. You passed. Now let us talk about the 4 remaining names. Chapter 29, The Society at Full Strength. The last thread settled in early June. He had not counted down to it. Countdowns had a quality of expectation that he had learned, over the months of this work, to manage carefully, because the work did not always arrive at the expected time or in the expected form, and treating any single moment as a conclusion tended to close off the ongoing attention that the threads required. But the last thread settled in early June, on a Tuesday evening, and when it did the number was 15. 15 threads. 15 specific qualities running in the background of his awareness with the reliability of something that had become part of his fundamental experience of the world. He had stopped, months ago, thinking of the threads as external. They were part of him now in the way that a compass is part of a navigator, not a separate instrument but an integrated sense that the navigation depended on. He did not immediately tell the group the number. He sat with it for an evening and a morning, alone, and let himself feel what it felt like to have built something to completion. What it felt like was not triumph. Triumph was a narrow, self-directed thing, and what he felt was something wider than that. It was closer to the satisfaction of a craftsperson who has finished a piece of work they are genuinely proud of, who can look at it and see every decision and every correction and every moment of uncertainty reflected in the finished object, and who knows that the finished object is exactly what it should be. It was also the beginning of the next thing. He had been thinking about the next thing for months, because the 15 threads and the Evergreen Society and the whiteboard diagram and Recovery Girl's documentation strategy were all in service of a confrontation he had been preparing for since the November night in the biology lab equipment room. The confrontation with institutional power. The conversation with the commission. The moment when what they had built had to be defended in the language of a world that had not built it and could not fully understand it from the outside. Nana Shimura had said, when the 6 remaining names are no longer in the remaining column, it is time. The remaining column was empty. He went to the satellite office on the Wednesday morning and arrived to find that Nana Shimura was already there, standing at the whiteboard with a new set of diagrams drawn in the precise, organized lines of someone who had been thinking through something for a long time and had recently reached conclusions. She looked at him when he came in. 15, she said. Yes. She nodded. I thought it was last night. I woke at 2 and the quality of the room felt different. She said this matter-of-factly, without explaining what she meant by the quality of the room, which he understood without explanation because he had felt it too. What are the diagrams? He asked. The commission strategy, she said. I have been refining it for 3 months. I want to show you the full version before we bring it to the group. He sat down. She turned to the whiteboard. What she had drawn was not a simple strategic plan. It was a layered analysis, the commission's institutional structure, its pressure points, its decision-making hierarchy, the specific individuals within it who would be most relevant to the conversation they needed to have, the likely objections and the most effective responses to each one, the documentary record they would bring and how to present it, and the specific question of who spoke, in what order, and to what end. He recognized, reading through it, the product of 30 years of understanding how power moved inside institutions, combined with 3 months of specific research into the current shape of an institution she had not existed inside for over 2 decades. You have been preparing this since January, he said. Since December, she said. Since the name. The name made it real enough to plan for. Yes. Before the name it was a possibility. After the name it was a responsibility. He looked at the diagrams for a long time. Outside the satellite office windows, the June morning was warm and bright and the street below was already full of the particular energy of early summer, the sense of the world coming fully into itself after the long careful months of preparation. When? He asked. Midsummer, she said. Late July. The commission has a review cycle that ends in August, and if we approach them in late July we place the conversation at the point in their cycle where new information is being actively incorporated rather than deferred to the next cycle. That is very precisely timed. I have been studying their review cycles. Of course she had. He looked at her, This woman who had been dead for over 20 years and who had spent 6 months becoming the most thorough strategic thinker he had ever encountered, who had taken the impossible circumstance of her return and converted it into the most comprehensive possible preparation for the work that had always, he thought, been her native domain. I want to tell the group today, he said. All of them. That the remaining column is empty. I know. I have already sent messages. They will be here at 6. He looked at her. You assumed I would want to tell them today. I assumed you would not wait, she said, which was not quite the same thing, and was more accurate. He nodded. He looked at the whiteboard, at the empty remaining column and the commission strategy and the 6 months of careful preparation rendered in precise lines. 6 o'clock, he said. 6 o'clock, she confirmed, and turned back to the whiteboard to add one final element to the diagram, and the morning moved steadily toward the evening that would change what the Evergreen Society was from something that had been built in the quiet to something that was ready to step into the light. Chapter 30, The Evening of the 15th Thread. They came at 6. All 15 of them, which was the first time all 15 had been in the satellite office simultaneously. The room was not designed for 15 people and the adjustment required a second table from the hallway storage and a rearrangement that Mirko executed with efficient practicality, moving furniture with the ease of someone for whom physical logistics were a natural language. When they were all seated or standing or arranged in the way that 15 people arrange themselves when the room is smaller than the gathering, Izuku stood at the whiteboard with the diagrams behind him and looked at the people in the room. He had spent months knowing each of them through the threads and through the meetings and through the specific texture of who they were, and knowing them individually was not the same as holding them all at once, 15 specific people who had agreed to something extraordinary and had built something real with him and with each other. He had prepared remarks. He had them in the notebook he was holding. He did not use them. The remaining column is empty, he said. 15 threads. All of you, here. This is what I was trying to build when I was sitting in a cafeteria with a notebook trying to figure out what the data I was reading meant and what, if anything, I was supposed to do about it. He paused. I did not know it was going to be this. I did not know it was going to be you, specifically, or that it was going to feel like this, specifically. I knew it was going to be important and I believed it was going to be right and everything else I have learned from being in the same room with you. The room was quiet. There is a next stage, he said. There is the commission, and there is the conversation we have been preparing for, and there is the question of what the Evergreen Society becomes when it is no longer operating in the quiet. He looked at Nana Shimura. We have been planning for it carefully and we are ready. But I wanted to say, before we talk about that what exists in this room right now is the thing I am most proud of in my life, and I wanted to say it plainly and without qualification. He sat down. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the full, inhabited silence of 15 people holding something together that was large enough to require all of them to hold it. Nana Shimura stood. She did not speak immediately. She looked at the room with the complete attention she brought to everything, moving through each face with the specific regard of someone who understands that each person in a room is a world and that acknowledging that takes time done properly. I came back into a world I did not recognize, she said, into a time I had not been part of, and the first thing I found was a young man sitting in a courtyard who had done something impossible for reasons that were entirely right. She paused. I have spent my professional life in service of a principle that this system has been unable to fully honor, that the people who give the most to the protection of others deserve to have something given back. That principle is what this room is. Not a theory. Not a plan. A fact, demonstrated in practice, in the lives of 15 people who chose it. She looked at Izuku. What you have built is not mine, she said. But I am proud to be part of it. And I think the person who started it should know that the person whose history made it necessary believes it is exactly what it should be. The room absorbed this. Then Mirko said, in the economy of someone who has been waiting for the correct moment, so. The commission. Which was, in its way, exactly the right note to strike. The laughter in the room when it came was the real kind, the kind that releases something rather than performing it, and Izuku felt it in all 15 threads simultaneously, a warm and specific chord that was the sound of 15 people who had each paid a cost and been given something back and who were, together, ready for the next thing. Nana Shimura sat back down. Recovery Girl opened her documentation folder. Ryukyu moved to the whiteboard to annotate the commission strategy diagram. Midnight poured tea. Outside the satellite office, the June evening was long and golden and warm, and the street below was full of the ordinary world going about its ordinary business, unknowing and indifferent and completely unaware that in a fourth-floor room above it, 15 people who were not supposed to be what they were had decided, together, that the next thing was going to happen on their terms. Izuku opened his notebook to a fresh page. At the top of the page he wrote, July. The commission. Everything we have built, brought into the light. Then he looked up and listened to the room, which was the room he had been building towards since a cafeteria table and a notebook and a small careful circle drawn around a single word. Residual. What was in the room now was not residual. It was primary. It was the thing itself. He closed the notebook and let the evening continue, and the Evergreen Society, 15 strong and ready for the world, continued with it.